Hello, everybody, and welcome as we get into a set review for Modern Horizons 2. This is Shawn. Go on Twitter as Busted Sleeves, and we're going to be talking about the Modern Horizons 2 spoilers with particular emphasis on their impacts on Modern. Today, I have with me Sam, Mr. Birkenbile, Tron expert, denier of handshakes. How's it going, Sam?
Don't touch me. Post-COVID, you might as well cut my hands off. That's how many hands I'm.
I think that's a good policy. That's a healthy policy.
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk about Modern Horizons 2. I think there's a lot of sweet cards in the set that will make a big impact on Modern, so I'm ready.
Sweet.
So yeah, when Modern Horizons 2 was initially announced, I was both excited but also a little nervous because, Modern Horizons 1, let me check notes. Ruined Modern. So mini bans came out of the set, both from cards in the set and other cards in Modern had to be banned to, level the playing field. So when the words Modern Horizons 2 first entered my eardrums, I was a little nervous. What about you?
I think I was nervous but excited. I think Modern Horizons 2 and Modern Horizons 1 was the same way. A lot of people undervalued it at the original announcements of a lot of the cards, and then the cards hit the format and it's way more impactful than people realized. But I'm very pro high bands risk reward of shaking up the format versus like a slow trickle of cards into the format. For me, that's my take. I would much rather than print a bunch of great cards and ban them. I know it's because I have the luxury that like if I lose a card of value, it doesn't kill me. Other players might not have that luxury, but I really like the aspect of just takes the shot on some cards. To make the game more fun and to change up the format. What's your take? Would you rather them be safe or would you rather roll the dice?
No, safe is boring. That's when you get sets like, I couldn't name one because I don't remember the boring sets, but I think it's important to take chances and take shots, and, WotC certainly has not been afraid to take chances, in the last handful of years. And I do believe Modern Horizons 1 was, maybe a big chance as far as the health format goes, but it was pretty much a sure thing as far as being a success for Magic because Modern is so popular, and they printed cards that were at a power level where they were definitely going to see play. So I really like the idea of a Modern set. I like the idea of printing cards that would be too powerful for Standard and just giving more tools to mix up Modern. And to me, the really only downside of having those streak of bans and things is really the monetary aspect. That's been extremely prevalent over the last couple of years where, you get heavily invested in tier 1 decks and then they ban a card that, itself might be $50, let alone, the problem used to be that all your other rares that were in the deck were now useless. But now it's, a ban can directly, Oko is a great example when, that card I want to say was roughly $50 when it got banned in Modern. Basically everybody had to have them. So, but as far as, trying things that are too powerful, I think it's fun to, play the busted deck for a little bit. And if they are too good, we can't figure out a way to beat them, to get rid of them.
I think I agree completely. And it's also, the impacts of like these cards are just really high, and the power levels of these cards are really high. So it's like you said, like it's not like when I was first getting into Extended and I bought the entire Thopter Depths combo, it got banned before I could play an event. The whole deck, like everything got banned out of it. Mm-hmm. So now they're trying to ban individual cards versus nerfing an entire deck. And a lot of the cards are so powerful on their own that they don't completely lose all their value because the deck goes from tier 1 to tier 2.
Yeah.
So they don't go from $40 for every rare to like 10 cents. Like they normally hold some weight. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that point you made is true. And I think Modern Horizons 1 hopefully got them off that when they had to ban Bridge from Below, and did they have to ban? They banned looting before Hogak as well? Is that right?
Yeah, looting and Bridge both took the bite.
Yeah, and then they still had to ban Hogak because the reality was that if there was any reasonable way you could cast that card, it was going to be extremely good. And we saw that firsthand. Who knows how many cards they would have had to ban for Hogak. So hopefully, that is a lesson they learned, and that if your Hogak's too good, just get rid of it.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I think that's a good assumption. It's just I do hope that they move faster towards these cards versus trying to conserve face or to save face. And just like if we have another Hogak in this set, don't ban all the other utility cards around it. Just ban it.
Absolutely, just ban the big scary guy. And I think they did because it was very meme worthy at the time that that was a second banning that had to take place when everybody knew what the problem was. But until, we are recording this on a Friday and people have already begun playing with the cards on Magic Online, and it does appear that there might be some shenanigans. But we can get into that later. We do need to actually talk about the cards in the set. So,
yes, for sure.
I will throw it to you, my good buddy Shawn. We're actually going to kick this off with reprints. That was at my behest because a lot of these cards I grew up playing with, and I've wanted in Modern for so long. And whether they will be Tier 1 or Tier 2 or not, I will still be excited to try out a lot of these cards in Modern. So let me throw it to you. Kick us off with the first reprint we have in Modern Horizons.
Yeah, so from our reprints, we're going to go through the Wooburg of all the reprints. And our first one's Angelic Curator. 1 and a white for a 1/1 flying protection from artifacts.
Yes, very powerful card. I don't think this is going to see play, so we'll just run it over to Karmic Guide because it's a lot cooler. We're excited to talk about. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
That's how we're going to do it, folks. If we see a card that's not good, we'll just keep it. So let's talk about Karmic Guide. 3 white. It's an angel spirit creature. 2/2 flying protection from black. Echo of 3 white. And when Karmic Guide enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is another Urza's Legacy reprint. A Reanimator favorite, mostly in Commander. But before we had, access to a lot of the stuff, this card did see play back in the day. You got any experience with Karmic Guide there?
I've cast Karmic Guide a couple times in Commander decks and things like that. It wasn't in Standard whenever I didn't play Standard when that was around, or Magic when that was printed. But I've definitely seen the impact, and I've already been seeing some deck lists. I think this one's going to have some play. There's definitely a Reanimator sub-theme, like you said, in the set. But the fact that it's a reanimation on a creature that's not like an extra effect. A lot of times reanimations on creatures you have to tap and sack them or do other hoops. So this one just entering does it. So it's already seeing a little bit of play, especially with cards like Persist floating around, which we'll look at a little bit later. But I definitely think this card will more than likely see at least some play. Whether or not it's going to break a format or be a Tier 1, I don't know. But I think it's going to be there.
Protean Hulk is legal. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, exactly. That's the main list I've seen that thing in, which is always healthy. If you say Protean Hulk, yes. Commander and 60 card formats, they all agree that card's always safe.
They're typically fair decks that want to cast the 6/6 for 7 and then just trade it off in combat. So I'm sure that'll be a good time for everybody. What's our next card?
So we got Seal of Cleansing. It looks like the return of seals. It's a 1 and a white enchantment. You could sacrifice Seal of Cleansing to destroy target artifact or enchantment.
All right, so we already have the green one in Modern, in whatever that seal is called. Seal, the green one. So, nothing big. Maybe some decks will want on the sideboard here or there. Maybe something like a blue-eye control wants something that they can put down early and leave the mana up later. But other than that,
yeah,
or maybe,
I think it has
maybe a Luris deck. Their sideboard. This is their sideboard disenchant, and they can buy it back. That's cool.
Yeah, I don't think it's super exciting, but I do think that there's a very clear enchantment sub-theme in the set, and we have some Enchantress effects. So being able to play this out of the board if you happen to not be in green, so you don't want the green one, or if white's your primary color, it'll probably show up, but it's not going to warp anything.
It'll show up here and there. But speaking of enchantments, I'm going to talk about one that I'm pretty excited about, and that's a Solitary Confinement. Costs 2 and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Solitary Confinement unless you discard a card. Skip your draw step. You have Shroud. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. So a lot of words on a card that saw a lot of play. And you said, you started around at the end of Cold Snap, so you probably never got to experience this card, did you?
No. I started Zendikar. So
Zendikar, okay.
Way after this card. And so my initial instinct was, this card has a lot of text, so I'm probably going to be wrong, and it's probably going to be good. My initial instinct was no, just because it has plenty of drawbacks. But the effects on it are insane. So, I don't have personal familiarity with it, but I know that there's a lot of text, which is a good indicator of an important card.
Yeah, so this is actually the centerpiece of my favorite Magic deck I've ever played. And that would be a deck called CAL, which stands for Confinement Assault Loam. So it's a deck that revolves around this card, Solitary Confinement, Life from the Loam, and Seismic Assault. And it was an old Modern deck, and it kind of grew my love for Life from the Loam. The deck really built right after Ravnica came out. Modern was pretty much overrun with Dredge and with Life from the Loam and Cycling Lands, and this deck was just a lot of fun for me. So, I think nowadays answering oddball enchantments or oddball permanents in general is a little too easy to be able to lean on a card like this. back in the day, game ones, people would just be dead to this most of the time, and that's just not going to be the case anymore. So looking at it now, if this card's good, it's probably going to be miserable, but I had a lot of fun with it, so I would be down to solitary confinement some people again, especially if they grant Squeak, Goblin to Bob. Is that even modern legal now?
I think it might be.
Anyway, that'll be for a topic for the deck building portion of that. What's our next card again?
So we've got Soul Snare, another enchantment, because that's a very clear sub-theme in this set. It's a 1 white. You can pay a white and sacrifice it. Exile target creature that's attacking you or a planeswalker you control. Also, I'm assuming they errata that to add planeswalker, because I don't think planeswalkers were around originally. But yeah, that interesting.
Well, this logo looks like it's from a Commander product, so it might just be one of those.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
I mean, bad removal spell is bad. There's no reason, Condemn is not playable, and it's significantly better than this card, so this card probably.
No, I agree. Yeah, I don't see a big thing out of that one.
All right, and now we get to a little innocuous card called Counterspell. Blue, counter target spell. Any thoughts, Sean? You ever heard of this card?
Yeah, I've heard of it, and I've cast it a few times. I've been interested in this card coming to Modern for a while, because the blue is fairly restrictive for decks. Mana is a lot better than it used to be. And honestly, just counter a flat spell for 2 mana is such a bad rate with the number of things people are doing in the early turns. It's definitely easy play. It's going to be good. But I'm surprised it took this long to show up, because I don't think it's going to turn around. Like, I won't play control because of counterspell. I need something else to make me want to play control.
Yeah, totally. I think it is an interesting meter to see, how big of an upgrade is it really over the slots like Mana Leak, Logic Not Remand, negate whatever random 2-mana counterspell that these control decks fit in, basically just based around whatever the rest of the deck looks like when counterspell is that solid piece of the puzzle. And my thought is it won't make any particular control deck miles better, but it will make control overall a lot more viable, just in the fact that you can. One of the big problems with control in Modern is that it's hard to have answers for everything, and Counterspell is that. So it's good against Ad Nauseam. It's good against any mid-range deck. It's going to be good against most aggro decks, and even the ones it's not great against, it'll still be there to counter a thing like Light Up the Stage or Teamer Battle Rage, whatever the finishing blow is. So it can give you time here and there. And then I think the fact that you're going to have access to Snapcaster Mage means you can base your deck a lot more around counters now than because you have such a solid one to lean on in counter.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you don't have to diversify it like you used to with counter magic. So I definitely think it's going to make those decks better, but not enough to maybe be like, oh, well, because counterspell, I'm going to run counter magic now.
Yeah, the decks I see gaining the most from this is a deck like Corey Burkhart, old Grixis control deck, just giving it something that's really high quality in the early game to make sure it can bridge and that. But
yeah.
I don't ever see it taking control of the format or getting banned or anything, but I do welcome it. I think this is necessary, for control to keep up with a lot of the unfair things going on. They need to improve quality. So
for sure,
I think it's good.
So our next one we've got Sea Drake, which is a 3-mana 4/3 flying. For someone who's never played it, that sounds pretty impressive. With the drawback of when it enters the battlefield, we return 2 lands you control to their owner's hands.
Yeah, cool card back in the day, but the rate now is just too bad. 3-mana 4/3 flying is not playable in Modern, so adding a drawback to that is a no.
Yeah, for sure.
Our next card is Sealer Removal. It's an enchantment for a single blue. Sacrifice Sealer Removal. Return target creature to its owner's hand.
I think this one's fine. I mean, it's unsummon. Technically, it's unsummon at instant speed because you're typically going to be playing it on your turn and then just holding it anyway. But it's an unsummon that gets see coming. So it only matters if your devotion matters. So Master of Waves, I could see a mono blue devotion deck wanting to bring it in out of the board for creature matchups. Or if there's some kind of Enchantress deck that splashes blue. But if a Vapor Snag is phenomenal for a bounce spell and it doesn't see really much play. So unless you want the enchantment effect, it's not going to be huge. Or if you're using it to combo with your own creatures as a way to trigger an enchantment thing, bounce your own creature, and then do something else with it. But I nothing that I know of.
Okay, so it does do a few things. A, I will keep bringing up Luris in regards to any seal,
Mhm.
just because, any playable spell that you could turn into, a permanent recast with Luris is going to be a legit thing. Also, something currently in Modern that's gaining traction is Through the Breach Emrakul. And Emrakul Aeon's Torn has protection from colored spells, but you can still put the seal on the battlefield, and then when they go to Through the Breach, activate it before they get attacked.
That's a really good call. Yeah, that the through the breach deck. I didn't even think about that part. That's really good.
So, and then something like this, all humans always means that more types of removal are going to be playable. Just because of Melee Mage. So that'll add a few extra sprinkles of it here and there. But it'll just be a role player. When people need something like this, and I welcome it. I think it's a cool card. I like old cards like this, so I'm happy to see it in Modern.
Yeah, for sure. So our next one we got. This is a card I know because I've heard about it a ton. I haven't personally cast it, but I've heard people just lament the days. And so it's Upheaval, a sorcery for blue. Return all permanents to their owner's hand. Oh, permanent, not just non-lands. Oh,
all permanents. Yeah, he gets it live on the podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
I read this as just like as an evacuation or something, not a
everything.
Oh man,
everything's gone. Yes.
For our audience, how are you doing this? And you're setting yourself back. So how are you leveraging this in an effective way?
The reason people lament Upheaval is because it was a centerpiece of a standard Psychotog control deck. And essentially what you would do is you would build up to 10 lands, you would cast Upheaval floating 4 mana, you would use that 4 mana to cast your Psychotog with the blue floating, and then you would have a circular logic backup to counterspell their opponent's follow-up. And so essentially you would return every permanent to its owner's hand, put your win condition into play with counterspell backup. And so that's why it is limited. It is currently banned in Commander. Obviously, it's extremely powerful in a multiplayer game, but I do think that it is powerful enough to see play in Modern, but it's going to have to be played really fast. So the deck that I actually thought that this could possibly fit in is Amulet Titan. You can make fast mana and recover from all your permanents coming back to your hand, and that's a deck that sometimes falls behind and just needs to catch up with something big. Obviously, usually it's a Primeval Titan. But Upheaval, is on that level of power. So I do think it could see play.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's pretty sweet. I mean, you have the whatever madness things are going on and like some of the faster decks. So the ability for decks in Modern to rebuild are so much faster than they used to be. So that's the only concern I have around it.
Totally, yeah. And yeah, decks aren't counting on hitting, their 5 and 6 land drop in order to play, huge things. At least most decks aren't. But it is, an extremely powerful card. So if you can find a way to discount it or play it fast and then get ahead on board, then it can do something.
For sure.
But our next card is Wonder. It's a creature for 3 and a blue, 2/2 flying. As long as Wonder is in your graveyard and you control island, creatures you control have flying. So,
I've always loved these kinds of cards. I don't know how much impact they're going to make in Modern, but I love the if it is in your graveyard, you get this extra value. My first thought was a Dredge deck could put one in a Miser's board because the Dredge deck really struggles against humans whenever they play an Auroch champion. I'm a huge Dredge player, and Auroch champion is just the bane of my existence because you can't touch them. It just sits there and blocks everything. So if you could mill your Wander then out of the board, you bring that in game 2. You might be able to go over top, but I just don't know if it's an effect that Modern really wants, since there's not a lot of blocking in Modern, with the exception of kind of that situation.
Yes, I see this card. That exact scenario you laid out is cool, but also this is like a mirror break. Back in the day, this saw most of its play in Blue-Green Madness, which is basically a mid-range creature deck with some counter spells, and how you would beat other creature decks is just drop a Wonder. They can't block any of your stuff, so you get to decide how the race is going to go. And so, Dredge is obviously a prime example of a deck that can make it work. We're already seeing Madness decks come out, and so, if a Madness deck that happens to have some Steam mix in there gets popular, and, your people are going to start having to mix in Wonder just to be, a mirror breaker. It doesn't require you to cast it, you just have to see it, you know what I mean? And it can win you the game that easily. So another powerful card, it's upshifted to rare here. So yeah, this is a card I love to see in Modern. Another card I have fond memories of, and I think it only really is going to do cool things. It's not going to be outrageous really ever. So I'm glad.
Yeah, for sure. Our next one we got is Bone Shredder. Gives us a chance to talk about two pieces with this one. This is a 2 and a black for a flying with Echo 2 and a black. When Bone Shredder enters the battlefield, destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. It's a 1/1, and it's also a Phyrexian Phyrexian minion. So in this set, they have errated Phyrexian as a creature type, which a lot of Infect players have been pretty mad about. But yeah.
Interesting. I did not know that. That is cool. I welcome it. I mean, that kind of is a race after all, right?
It is. And the big thing people have called out is by errating to have Phyrexian minion. So Inkmoth Nexus now has Phyrexian creature type. So does Glistener Elf. So does Blighted Agent. So now, like, one of my first thoughts was all the hate they printed for Tron, and now Tron can just be a black version of Tron and run Plague Engineer, named Phyrexian.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely interesting that those are all the same creature type now. That is very bad for Insect.
Yep. Plague Engineer.
I don't know that Tron will be doing that, but like humans and other decks that can already play this thing will definitely be doing it. But I like the idea. So
if Tron goes, I mean, because that's like Tron's worst match is Infect. Like,
oh yeah, but like but it's never like on the draw. It just doesn't work because you're dead already, and then on the play, sometimes you're dead already. So. I don't know that it's worth changing your whole deck. Sometimes you just got to take an L and keep it moving.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right, I'll kick us off with our next card, which is Braid's Cabal Minion. 2 black for a legendary human minion. 2/2. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact creature land. This was originally printed in Odyssey. So this was really when I started playing. This had just been banned in Standard. Can you believe that?
Oh, I'm not surprised. It's still banned in Commander, I believe.
You may be right. If you're right or wrong, doesn't really matter. But it has been banned in Commander for 10 years or whatever. So that at least deserves respect.
Yeah, I think it's sweet. I don't know if it's gonna do anything massive to the format. My first thought was we've got a lot of pieces that Pox decks can be a thing close. They can. Totally. These Pox decks are getting really close to being very, very real. And so. It depends on how fast the format is, if they can really hamper down the more aggressive decks.
Totally. I think this card is too slow. I think some people play it in cute scenarios. Maybe they have a Kalitas where they don't really need it, and this can punish whatever deck they want to punish, or maybe 8-rack places in the sideboard. But I don't see this being a player. It's too vulnerable. It's too small. It costs too much. The effect is not that brutal anymore. So, yeah, I don't see it, but you never know. It'd be cool to see it.
I mean, if you stick one against, if Control does wake up with Counterspell, their only resource Control cares about. Oh, you know what?
This is a human. It is a human.
Yeah.
So
you can start peeling away their mana.
We can finally do something with these extra Aether Vials. Wow. We figured it out. I'm going to order a playset now, baby.
Oh, you should have already had a playset.
All right, kick us off with our next available card. Why don't you?
we got another enchantment. This one is Greed. It is 3 and a black. Pay a black, pay 2 life, draw a card.
Yeah, an enchantment from I think Legends. Just bad and unplayable. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay, let's get to our next card, which is warrants some more discussion possibly. That's Patriarch's Bidding. 3 black sorcery. Each player chooses a creature type. Each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from their graveyard to the battlefield. You see any tribes taking advantage of this here?
I could see it, but I think it's too slow at 5 mana. I think we have other mass reanimation effects and things, but maybe I just don't think, especially the fact that it's each player that the chance that you're playing another tribal based deck is just kind of high. So I don't see it being massive.
Yeah, if you look at this, your thought is, I want to play this, and then my opponent immediately dies. And there are plenty of cards, Rally of the Ancestors being one, that are going to do a similar thing for a similar cost. So I don't see it. But a lot of these tribes are getting more and more cards, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this come out at some point. It's probably going to have to do with something making it a little cheaper or helping you flash it back or something like that, because like you said, at 5 mana, it's pretty slow for modern.
Yeah.
And our
So our next one we have is Scourge Familiar. It's 4 and a black. It's a 3/2 flyer. You can discard that card to add a black mana.
yeah, extremely powerful card. It is from Urza's Saga, so you know right off the bat it's completely busted. This is the normal combo in Commander with Get Rock Monster. You discard a Dagmar Salvage, make it black, dredge your hand, rinse and repeat. But Modern, I think that's going to be too slow of a combo. 2 5-drops in the.
No, I agree. The text is really strong, but that mana cost is intimidating.
If someone can reanimate this, like, a lot of the reanimate spells require it to be non-legendary, so maybe this gets reanimated and then you discard a bunch of stuff. But
Can we 2 sail into this and Get Rock?
Right, yeah, something nutty like that. There you go. Yeah. Now we only spent 9 mana for our 10 mana with creatures. What a value!
Look at that discount. That's just enough for us to throw away a Dagmar.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's move on to the next thing before we get too deep on that. Chance Encounter. It's enchantment for 2 red. Whenever you win a coin flip, put a luck counter on Chance Encounter at the beginning of your upkeep. If Chance Encounter has 10 or more luck counters on it, you win the game.
I'm F6ing 3 that says flip a coin.
All right, just read me another card.
All right, Flame Rift. 1 and a red sorcery. Deal 4 damage to each player.
Spicy. Big damage, 4 to each player. This is a mainstay in like Legacy Burn, I think. 2 mana, 4 damage is a lot. The only issue I see with this in, Burn is where I think about this. I don't really think about it in Prowess or the other decks. Is that, you are a Fetch, Shock, Eidolon deck. So, there's a lot of games where it comes down to your race, and I don't know if Flame Rift is going to get you there.
So my thought was like everybody's been talking about Burn. I'm more interested in our Teamer Battle Rage Death Shadow shells. Because we get to hit ourselves for 4, and we're making ourselves not depend on Battle Rage to kill our opponent, because we've just Flame Rifted them a couple times where 1 shadow kills them on 1 shot without having to have Battle Rage.
Interesting. I didn't even think about Death Shadow, but that totally makes sense. Yeah, in a more maybe one of those more aggressive based Shadow decks with Spheres and stuff like that. I totally see it. I wouldn't see it in some of the slower ones, because when the games get long in a Death Shadow deck, you start to lose your ability to cast cards because you're too low. And so this doesn't play well in that, but it totally plays well into Battle Rage you. So that is a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I'll get us on with Goblin Bombardment. Enchantment for 1 and a red. Sacrifice a creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 to any target. So nice little sack outlet.
Yeah, I mean, free sack outlet. You don't have to sink in mana in it. I think it will see play. I don't know where yet, but I mean, I think it will definitely see some kind of play, and not in some way where people are doing it fairly. Like they're going to find a way to make a mass number of tokens and just launch them all. Yeah,
this will not be done in fair ways. It's just not good enough to, pay that price for that 1 damage. But all it's going to take, the right Yawgmoth build or whatever, if someone can figure out a way to make this unfair, it is very aggressively costed, shall I say, in that, if you're not able to get there with your combo, this is still a card that can help you win a game and squeak things out, those side type of games.
Yeah, for sure. So then our next one is Gorilla Shaman. 1 red, 1/1 Ape Shaman. You can pay double X and 1 to destroy target non-creature artifact with mana value X.
Yeah, if artifact lands were legal, I'd be all over it. But since they're not, I'm going to say it's going to be too slow for Modern.
I agree. Yeah.
Right,
you should be doing better stuff.
Let's move on quickly, because the next card is way more exciting, and that card is Imperial Recruiter, which is a human advisor for 2 and a red, 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you get to search your library for a creature card with power 2 or less, reveal it to your opponent, put it in your hand.
I think it's nuts. It fetches like so many of the creature combo deck pieces, the Feldar Guardian combos and all that stuff. I think it's great. It just snags all these combo cards.
This, to me, smells of one of the bigger risks they took, certainly in the reprint department, because this card is, extremely powerful. We do not get a lot of tutors in Modern that are this high quality.
Yeah. And it seems like it's not because it's so restrictive on the creature, but the only creatures you want to pull off this, it pulls them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can find cards that you can't find, but you can also find a lot of extremely good, combos, and obviously it is a human. So I'm thinking right off the bat, humans, you got to cut 4 3-drops, because we're putting 4 of these bad boys in day 1.
Yeah. Because the quality of humans are so varied from one human to the next.
Then it gives you more virtual copies of the things you cut anyway. So I think it's gonna humans has fallen off quite a bit lately, and I think it's going to help humans right back into tier one, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
All right,
So our
so we
next
both
one
agreed,
we've
totally
got,
listed.
yeah. Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Some sweet combo. So our next one we got is Mog Salvage. 2 in a red instant. Destroy target artifact, but if an opponent controls an island and you control a mountain, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost. So potentially a free spell, destroy target artifact.
Yeah, I love to see a free on my card. So, whenever you need a shatter against the blue deck, this card's going to be right at home. So if something like a blue-red Urza becomes popular, mirrors are going to be who draws more of this card. It's such a huge tempo swing. And I was going to say Tron, but never mind. They don't play islands.
I guess that's my question with this card, right? So against non-blue artifact decks like Tron or something along those lines, or decks that might not have an island because their blue sources are non-islands, they're just other dual lands, is paying the extra mana for Shatter worth the risk for the free ones versus Urza decks?
Definitely not, especially considering that you can get, added bonuses and multiple shatters for the same cost. So it's literally going to have to be there is a blue deck we need to shatter,
Yeah, for sure. There's some kind of ensnaring bridge thing in the way.
So our next card is one that is getting people excited not only because of the card itself, but because of an archetype that it seems may be viable in modern come the printing of Modern Horizons 2. This card is Enchantress's Presence, enchantment for 2 and a green. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I've been talking about since we've been talking about the new to modern cards. Is they've been pushing the Enchantress builds, and this is what you need to make it work. So I think you will see play. How quality it is going to depend on how fast the deck can operate, but I definitely think it's going to be an impact.
Yeah, I think the speed is definitely going to be an issue, and maybe it's going to need cards like the Solitary Confinement we mentioned earlier. More prison style effects to let them have time to build up. Yeah, it's really going to depend on how fast they can get off the ground. It seems like a deck to me, just in, like rough drafting in my head, that it's going to be one of those decks you need to have the Utopia Sprawl.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you don't have anything like the Sarah Sanctum to get you going. You need some help to get this deck off the ground. But we'll see. Yeah. It would be sweet. To me, it'd be a welcome addition to Modern. So, I hope it's cool.
Yeah. So our next one, Hunting Pack. It's an instant, create a 4/4 green beaster token with Storm, but it's for 5 green. So it's like we made the Goldilocks Bears. We have Empty the Warrens, and in this set we got a small Empty the Warrens and a big Empty the Warrens.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite cards from, I think, Scourge is the original set. I always get those Onslaught block ones mixed up, but yeah, super cool card, completely unplayable.
Yeah.
Our next card is totally playable, though, and that is Quirion Ranger, Elf Ranger for a single green. It's a 1/1. It lets you return a force you control to its owner's hand to untap target creature, and you can only activate that ability once.
Yeah, this card's nuts. I mean, the historic elf deck I've been losing to the historic elves with fairly consistent rates of losing on turn 3s and 4s. So I think elves gets really good the less interactive the modern format gets, and this drives that home.
Yeah, if you allow elves to sit there and basically twiddle, their archdruid, tap and untap with it, you're gonna die a horrible death. And this card allows you to do that. As soon as turn 3, you can tap archdruid, drop the Quirion Ranger, something else, untap it, go for more mana the next time, and this will be a card that will, basically enable their most broken draws. And I like that they reprinted this card, and I also like them somewhat trickling in the tribal. We're not seeing a Wirewood Symbiote in this set as well that goes, here's all the tools right now. They're kind of doing it in a more safe way where they're trickling in the very powerful cards that kind of want to.
Yeah, I like it. And I honestly, elves existing with this card encourages interaction, which I think is where we get a healthier format. So if you can't consistently be faster and it's constantly a coin flip, then you'll have some players who will go to more interactive decks, and that's when we start to actually define a format versus just everybody's big ships passing each other.
Totally. I think any modern that is, shifting more towards Lightning Bolt is going to be healthy, really. So what's our next card?
Yeah. So our next one's Squirrel Mob. This is 1 green for a 2/2 squirrel. Squirrel Mob gets +1/+1 for each other squirrel on the battlefield.
So big squirrely boy. Yeah. So not a great card. Super cool. I love. Is this our first squirrel we're seeing? If not, I just want to mention squirrels are super sick. It is. I love squirrels, and I can't wait to get into more of the set. But yeah, this one's probably not going to be much.
Yeah, this is our first squirrel we're seeing. It's just this is a sign of things to come.
Yeah. Our next card is one I'm kind of interested to see. It's a Titania Protector of Argoth, 3GG for a 5/3 legendary elemental. When it enters the battlefield, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you get a 5/3 elemental creature token. What do you think about this legend making its debut in Modern?
I feel like it's going to show up somewhere at some point. I don't know when, but the fact it's quasi a 4 mana because it rebuys you a fetch land out of your graveyard. So it's a 4 mana 5/3. It rebuys that fetch land. You immediately get to crack it, and you get to make another 5/3. So you're basically paying 4 mana for 10 power. I think that's fine. So I think you're going to see it eventually, but I don't know if it's going to like completely shake the format.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I agree. At 5, it's pretty expensive. I would look for this, in some like Amulet Titan. You're always looking at, any green creature that costs 4+. You have an eye on it, and this can do some interesting things there, but probably not. We will see. I'll spoil something we'll see in a little bit, and that's a Zuran Orb, and that's a card that works extremely well with Tanya, in which you can make 30 power per se off 4 or 5 mana. So that's something interesting to look at, I think.
But to your point, also, it is 3 toughness. So if we're seeing Elves makes Bolt return, then this card gets drastically worse because your combo piece just dies to Bolt.
Yeah, but I mean, you could set it up to where you have the Orb in play, you play this, and then all they could really deny you is 1 token because they kill her with their trigger on the stack. But you can sack all your lands and get a bunch of tokens. And if you're the kind of person that likes to play Flagstones of Trocare, then I'm sure you're excited about this lady here.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about Flagstones. That's great. So our next one we got classic Yavimaya Elder. 1 green. It's a 2/1. When it dies, you may search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand, and then shuffle. It also can kill itself by paying 2 to sack it to draw a card.
Yeah, it's got a lot of value built in. Unfortunately, it costs approximately $1 million in terms of Modern mana, so I think I'll leave this in the draft boosts for Modern Horizons 2.
Yeah, this is not Modern Magic, if you will.
I will be first picking this in draft.
Oh, yeah.
That way I can just pick all the other nonsense and have a ball. And damage used to stack when this was printed, so that's the last thing we'll say about that guy. Our next card is Chainer, Nightmare Adept. 2 black-red for a 3/2 legendary human minion. Its abilities are discard a card, may cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn, activate this only once each turn, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until your next turn. Very powerful creature.
It's really powerful. I don't think my brain's wrinkled enough to fix it right now, but I would not be surprised right now. I don't think it's going to get a lot of play. I would not be surprised to be completely wrong. The fact that you can only do it once a turn prevents you from having like any built-in combos. But the effect is a free discard outlet, so I could definitely see it having some kind of play.
Yeah, I could definitely see it, show up in those slots I mentioned earlier with Chainer, in that sometimes you just need, a 4-drop, a more powerful card to board in. And we've already seen Madness decks, make their way into Modern, so there's no reason you can play this in the sideboard of, a black-red, Madness deck, or, an old Hollow One style deck makes a resurgence of some of these new cards, because this card is extremely powerful. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it coming out of sideboards or, being a one of top end in those decks. But yeah, I don't see it warping the format or anything like that.
I mean, Christmas Land, you play this, you discard Vine, you cast Hollow One out of your graveyard if you've discarded some other stuff.
Absolutely. And it gives the Hollow One haste.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
you can smash. So our next one is a classic that is like one of the first cards I ever looked at and was like completely mesmerized by. And this is Fire and Ice. It is a split card that is instant on both sides. And it is Fire, 1 in a red, deal 2 damage. Divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. And Ice is 1 in a blue, tap target permanent, draw a card.
Excellent. This is a card that I am extremely fond of. I have played this card countless times, and I'm so happy to see it in Modern.
Yeah. It's not backbreaking, it's not insane, but it gives the flexibility to your tempo decks that they need to keep up with the insane deck.
I'm mostly excited because people will no longer have an excuse to put Is It Charm in their Modern decks.
Hey, I'm an Izzatron lover, so you don't
I'm
attack
gonna have to
Izzatron in
switch
this
it up
place.
to the old Fire Ice because it is much better.
Yeah,
Back
it's
in the
tough for
day,
the permanent.
yeah, any permanent. Hey, Tron, no Tron for you, turn 3, baby. Especially, we used to put these on Isochron Scepters. I think that's too vulnerable these days for Modern, but I would love to be Sceptering people. So sign me up
Oh
for
yeah.
sure. This is one
Can
of some
did
of
they
these
unravel
cards.
that though, where it's like now they have a combined mana cost of 4?
That is true, yes. So maybe it doesn't work, yeah. But I don't know if when you imprint, if you can select one of them and then the whole thing works. I haven't looked at that in many
Yeah.
years, but if not, it'll be fine. I don't think the Scepter is going to be coming back to Modern. All right, and our next card is Mirari's Wake, an enchantment for 3 green and a white. It gives your creatures +1/+1, and whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced. You see this make an impact in Modern, Shawn?
I think it will. I think it's gonna take some work, and I think the 2 lines of text are contradictory. So the decks that want this effect don't really care about +1/+1 for creatures. They're not making an army of creatures. But we've seen what Nissa can do with mana, so I think doubling your mana is something that any Magic player is going to want to go after.
Yeah, it is a big splashy effect, and I think you're totally right. The +1/+1 and the add mana don't usually go together. It actually was a little bit when it was popular because of Decree of Justice cycling for 1/1 tokens. This makes it better, but you were already winning the game by that point. I would love to see this next to Wilderness Reclamation. Maybe in those style of decks, they just play 1 or 2 of these to both have extra copies and B, you basically follow up the next turn with this and just immediately slam the door instead of, maybe having to play it careful for a couple of turns. But outside of that, Omniscience is another card you could sneak into play. So if we're hard casting it, then it's going to have to get ramped out.
Yeah. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I just want you to realize that would mean that turn 4, play Mirari's Wake, turn 5, Tooth and Nail for Scourge Familiar and Get Rod Monster. And we're there.
We broke it. We better hurry up and buy all these 5 drops. It's too late.
Done.
Next card is actually playable, though. So what do you think about that one?
Yeah, our next card, I think is I was surprised when they printed this one. Shardless Agent, 1 green/blue for an artifact creature, a human rogue, and is a 2/2 with Cascade.
Yeah, it used to be extremely popular in Legacy. It is, quite the powerful card in its own right. And we have seen, Cascade decks be, tier 2 or 3, and in the case of Living in tier 1 in some cases. So this is definitely another, arrow in the holster, Bill.
Yeah, and as we continue looking through the other stuff, and with Time Spiral Remastered, they made a lot of suspend cards more available. Time Spiral Remastered put Living In and Restore Balance all in there. And then we have a bunch of other free spells in the set. So I think for a reason they're putting this all together. And so I expect it to definitely see some play.
Yeah, I think Cascade is like a pretty fun mechanic to introduce into Modern. It did, when Bloodbraid Elf was legal, it pretty much ruled block in Standard, but Modern's powerful enough. We were, when Bloodbraid got unbanned, people were pretty scared of it, and it turned out to be pretty harmless. So I think Shardless Agent will pretty much prove to be the same. It doesn't really allow you to do things you couldn't do before. So I think it'll just be a really solid addition to, whatever mid-range deck is looking to do things like this.
I completely forgot Bloodbraid Elf used to be on the bench.
Yeah, totally on the bench. And then, Shardless Agent, maybe it can get in the mix in some of these Coco decks to just give him even more value. And it is a human, so there's that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Shawn, our next card is Sterling Grove, which is an enchantment for green and a white. It gives your other enchantment Shroud, and it has the ability to sacrifice for 1 colorless mana, search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle it, and put it on top of your library. So what do you think about this tutor effect? Is that going to be powerful enough to launch these Enchantress decks into the stratosphere?
So I say yes because the text is really good and tutors are just one of the most powerful things you can do in Magic. I think anytime it says search your library for is really, really strong. That's why fetch lands are really good. But at the same time, in Modern's all about proactivity. You are spending turn 2 not playing a card that gives you card advantage, not playing a card that interacts, and not playing a card that taxes. You're playing a card literally that you're going to take a turn off later for. You can upkeep, sack it. So that's, if you want to upkeep, sack it, find another 2-drop enchantment, and then play that on turn 3, that's fine. So I think it will get some play, but I don't expect it to be 4 ofs, and it could just be a sideboard piece.
Yeah, I could see this. Yeah, sideboard piece here and there. Maybe Boggles has one on the sideboard to get something fancy, but I think it's going to be a little too slow for Modern. The fact that it puts it on top makes it really tough. A lot of the extremely powerful Enchantress cards are 3 mana, so that, turn 3 upkeep sack it, not have 3 mana left, is going to be tough. So again, it's going to come down to, can this deck find the mana it needs to actually get all these pieces moving?
Yeah.
And
100%.
my vote would be no, because Monastery Swiftspear is very good, so that would be
Exactly. That's our bar.
Yeah.
So our next card, we're leaving the dyslexic kid to read this text box, but we have 1 white-black for a sorcery, Vindicate, destroy target permanent. I know there's a lot of text in there.
Yeah, very sweet and simple. 3 words, destroy target permanent. This was my first favorite card in Magic. My Magic the Gathering online handle is Sam the Vindicator. So I love this card. I've cast it a lot. I've been dying for this card to be printed in Modern, and here we are now. So I'm freaking pumped. What are you gauging this as far as playability in Modern right now?
This card for me, if the format gets healthier, I'm putting the majority of that on Vindicate. Because now all these mid-range decks, these control decks, like with Counterspell, where you had to run a variety of counter magic that was always conditional, you had to run all this removal that was always conditional. So I think Vindicate will allow some of these more mid-range control decks to relegate without having to worry about whether or not their card is live or not. The only drawback is the fact that it can hit lands, means it could also just as quickly go into some kind of Stone Rain deck. But I think it's great, and I think it's a really good print to Modern, especially because 3 CMC is just not as scary as it used to be.
Yeah, I think, in Modern, there's already as many Stone Rains as you really want to play, so I don't think that's really going to be a big factor. Most of my experience comes from playing this in a 5-color zoo deck, where you would basically play a 1-drop, a Tarmogoyf, and then you would Vindicate, whatever they played to block or their land. And that's where I see it would make the best impact in Modern as well. I don't see this as a catch-all removal spell that you can play a bunch of copies of. You see this as, I get to aggro you because I have the answer to whatever you have. And
that's good. That's a good point.
Because, these, again, if control decks are moving towards Counterspell, they're going to have to move away from Smiths and Sorceries. And, we'll get to later, there's a lot of cards that, point towards a possible 5-color zoo deck that could play some big idiots and then have, maybe Stubborn Denial backup or Vindicate, to punish the lands and things like that. And this is kind of one of the first things we're going to see that is really, I don't know how many cards that are bad for Tron. And so we'll talk about that as the rest of the set unfolds, but a lot of cards coming out of the set that go, hey, buddy, those Tron pieces are at risk.
Yeah, no, but also keep an eye on how many of those are instant versus sorcery speed interactions.
Yeah, totally. And we'll get to our next card so we can keep this long-ass set review moving, and that's going to be Curse Totem, an artifact for just 2 colorless. Activated abilities of creatures can't be activated. Do we need to go past, this is a sideboard card?
No, I think it's sideboard and that's it.
I will just add that the art on this one is sick, and I love it, and I'll hope to crack a foil. But
that's true. Yeah, the art's great. So our next one is Extruder. It's a 4-mana 4/3 with Echo. Sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and the Echo cost is 4.
Cool. Our next card is Millikin.
Yeah,
it's the artifact creature for 2. It's the 0/1. Tap it and mill a card to add a colorless. Anything with that guy?
Maybe if some kind of Lantern deck comes back, but you can't target your opponents. Probably not.
It does mill a card, and it is a construct. But other than that, please read me another card.
Yeah, so we have Nerviniel's Disc. This is another classic. 4 mana. It enters the battlefield tapped. Pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice it. Destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. I guess you don't sack it. It gets destroyed on resolution.
Yes. It destroys itself, and it also does not hit planeswalkers because this card was made approximately 8,500.
Yeah. So maybe if there's a planeswalker deck, that's bad. Yeah.
Maybe if some artifact, Oblivion Stone. I just don't see it. It's cool, but I just don't see it ever.
Yeah, the tapped aspect's real tough.
Yeah, real tough. Waiting a turn on your 4-drops real bad. So our next card is going to be Patchwork Gnomes, 3 mana for a gnome artifact creature, 2/1. Discard a card to regenerate. Is that rate still holding up these days?
No, it doesn't hold up like it used to. Free discard outlets, we've mentioned them a couple times, are good, but the other ones we've seen so far have more text.
Yep. Read me a better card on it.
All right, so this one we've referenced earlier. This is Zuran Orb. It's a 0 mana artifact, sacrifice a land, you gain 2 life.
Yeah, I like this card. I think it is at an interesting power level in that, for 0 mana, it gives you the ability to, gain a ton of life. And we see decks like Amulet Titan or, Red Green Scapeshift that make use of a lot of land drops, but they typically want to keep those lands in play.
Yeah, unless you have some way you're breaking it. It's just kind of like a safety valve that there's better versions of.
Yeah, but I totally could see this being a sideboard card in Amulet Titan. It does cost 0. You can transmute for it. And so, if you just need a little more life, I could see it, filing in here and there. There's a lot of word decks. This could fit there as well. So I expect to see a splash here and there. Nothing really built around it just because there's no fast spawn to make it.
Sure.
Our next card, Cabal Coffer. We're in the lands now, ladies and gents. This land makes you pay 2 and tap it to add a black for each swamp. This is a pretty popular card in the old Commander. Go check the price tag on this baby right now.
Yeah, I think it's more of a Commander reprint, which is disappointing because they made it a Mythic. So if you're wanting one, buy it pretty fast because Horizons is print to demand, but we'll see how that actually plays out. So it will dip and then go right back up. There's been some standard decks in the past where they've played Urborg and whatever the Dominaria version of this card was. So maybe you can go some mono black swamp heavy combo deck, but I don't see it being like a massive player in Modern.
Yeah, it's if someone can find a mono black deck, there are a lot of powerful black cards in the set. So maybe this is just one piece of the puzzle, but we've got a lot of new pieces, but extremely powerful card, but you got to make it work. You're gonna have to. You're definitely gonna be like a 4 Urborg deck if you're a Cabal Coffer deck because just using this on rate is gonna be.
Yeah, because until you have 3 other swamps, you're losing mana to use it.
Yep, totally. What's our next?
So we have Mishra's Factory, which is an interesting one. This is a tap for a colorless mana. Pay 1, it becomes a 2/2 assembly worker until the end of turn. Or you can tap it, target assembly worker creature gets +1/+1 until the end of turn. So another version of Mutavault.
Yeah, we have, essentially another creature land. Yeah, Mutavault, kind of is a takeoff of this because this is originally from Antiquities, I believe. And it does become an artifact creature instead of a changeling. So, that's a distinction that might matter in some of these affinity decks. We do see a lot of affinity pieces in the set. So, yeah, maybe there, but really outside of there, no.
No.
All right, so our next land we get, and actually our last reprint of Modern Horizons 2 that we're going to get to, is Riptide Laboratory. The land from Onslaught, taps for colorless, or you can tap it, pay a colorless and a blue to return target wizard you control to its owner's hand. Any wizards in Modern? You know of any wizards?
There's a few, but whether or not they're good enough to pay extra 2 mana to get back, I don't know. Like Snapcaster Mage, obviously, but it is real slow value. Real slow value.
That is interesting. Snapcaster Mage is a wizard. So yeah, this card, that combination is extremely powerful, but like you said, very slow, very mana intensive. But I do see that working, really, in Modern. I see a deck that can slow down the early game by whatever means they need to, and then take advantage of this engine. Really, a deck again. I love harkening back to completely unplayable decks, but Corey Burkhart Grixis, this card is perfect in that deck that is just only trying to beat you with Snapcaster. So, I think the fact that it basically allows you to build a fully Snapcaster deck and just be fully powered up is quite powerful.
Yeah. It might see definitely play as like a one of, but being colorless is also pretty rough.
And I've also kind of brooded in my head with this a little bit in that a lot of the powerful fairies are also wizards. Spellstorm Sprite, for example, is a wizard. So there's a lot of things you can do. I think that could perhaps a show like that use Aether Vial. That way you have additional mana to use this thing. And, maybe you get your Aether Vial to 4, you start misbind clicking and then returning it to your hand with the Riptide Lab. But that, that is Magical Christmas Land, but those are all powerful playable cards that we mentioned. So you never know, really.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the last thing to acknowledge, we will be getting the 5 original Zendikar fetch lands.
Yes.
They obviously do impact Modern, but they're already there. The biggest impact is that their prices will hopefully go down a little bit.
Yeah, it'll help those prices. I think they can get, even the blue ones to maybe like a $40 range this time, because we did see that a little bit during the pandemic. They've obviously started to come back up as people get excited about playing paper again. But honestly, I'm happy to see reprints of Fetchlands in every freaking set because I like playing with them. I like that they live in, modern and older sets, but, keep reprinting them. We don't need these things $50, $60.
No, too much of a barrier.
All right, so now, we're ready to get into, just normal new cards printed. We're going to do this in Wooburg order. We've eliminated a lot of cards that aren't going to see play because there's no reason to talk about garbage commons that are definitely not going to see play. So we kind of have our list of cards we are and aren't going to talk about, and I'll go ahead and kick it off since my mouth is already moving. Our first card in white we're going to talk about is Blossoming Calm. And let me actually get to the text box of this here card. Scroll up 35 centimeters. Okay. Blossoming Calm is an instant for single white. You gain hexproof until your next turn. You gain 2 life, and it has rebound. What do you think about this?
So basically, to read the card correctly, it's a white instant. You gain hexproof. You gain 4 life. Because you rarely need hexproof on your own turn. So what you're really typically doing with this card is your opponent goes off on Valakut or whatever thing they're doing on their turn to kill you. You're preventing them from killing you on that turn. You're gaining 2 life, and on your upkeep, you're gaining 2 more life and maybe adding to your own storm count if that matters. But that hexproof component is just massive.
Yeah, and you do forget that it does actually work 2 turns in a row because it's until your next turn. So you could stop them the turn they're going off, and on your next turn, it's going to give you hexproof again.
Yeah, I skipped till your next turn. So yeah, you get to blank 2 of their turns in a row, which like for a control deck, that's probably all they need just to get back into the game.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is in that sideboard, if this is in your sideboard for that reason, you're going to bring this in against burn too, because it's counterspell gain 2 life. So it's going to be a thorn in the side of a lot of Lightning Bolt and Valakut players, I think. But, I think we'll see in small numbers in sideboards here and there, and, maybe it's good enough to main deck in either some unfair deck that needs a little more time, or it's one of those Snapcaster-based decks we talked about earlier.
Yeah, for sure. So our next one we have is Esper Sentinel. This is 1 white for a 1/1 artifact creature human soldier, which I thought was a pretty interesting little line of text. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is the Esper Sentinel's power.
Yeah, very interesting. Like you said, artifact creature, human. There's 2 zones we could see it going right there. It's an artifact creature that can pick up modular counters and make that ability harder to pay. It can pick up counters from Thalia's Lieutenant, make it harder to pay. And it tag teams beautifully with Thalia to make your opponent just like Nightmare of casting spells. So this card does a lot, but you probably are going to need to beef it up to make it great. I'm not sure. This card is very intriguing.
I probably see some play early, and I think its play is going to drop off as time goes. I think it's overly hyped by a lot. I think like Commander, the effect is really interesting because you're having a lot of players go. But I mean, there's so many decks that are playing creatures that you're not getting consistent activations off of it. And even when you are, the decks that want to play this 1 mana, 1/1 artifact or human, both those are linear aggressive decks. Your goal is to not give your opponent very many turns to trigger it. Your goal is to give them as few opportunities to trigger as possible. If they're triggering it very often, then you're probably losing the game anyway. Yeah. So I think it's good, but I definitely think the hype on it is way too high for a card that doesn't really play to the style of its typical archetype.
I see what you're saying. The things I like about it are that it does have a target that's on its head, so it's going to have to be the first thing your opponent looks at with the removal spell most of the time because they can't afford to have their mana attacks, and so that is a bonus in its favor. And also that we'll see in the set, there's a lot of blue and white artifact things going on, and that this could just be a quality 1-drop that Affinity gets to play, draw a few cards along the way, and keep their engine going. So I definitely see it more in the artifact decks than the human deck. But
yeah, as a big player of Affinity, I'm not sure if I'd play it over Bomat Courier. Is my biggest issue. Bomat Courier or maybe Single Pest.
Yeah, you never know. It could be a lot of 1-drops that deck because there's a lot of modular moving things around, and then we see the keyword Affinity itself making a return later as well. So we'll just have to see.
The Lost of Opal also makes us want to play more 1-drops. That's a fair point. Yeah.
Don't hurt anyone's feelings by bringing that up. Okay, our next card is an enchantment called Out of Time. Costs 1 white. When it enters the battlefield, untap all creatures, then phase them out until Out of Time leaves the battlefield. Put a time counter on Out of Time for each creature phased out this way, and it has vanishing. So essentially, you're going to play this, exile all creatures. For each creature's exiled, this thing gets a counter. At the beginning of your turn, a counter goes off, and then when all the counters are gone, creatures come back. So initially, a little behind the scenes for everybody out there, we have a little list of cards we do and did not want to talk about. I wanted to talk about this, but Shawn, you didn't want to talk about this. Do you not think you'll see any play?
I think it might see a little bit of play, but I don't think you'll see much because the problem is Modern is not a very go wide format with the exception of like humans and maybe Elves gets introduced. So you're not putting a lot of vanishing counters on it. So you're just kind of setting up, you're delaying a little bit, which is good. But I think there's a lot of conditions for it to do what I want it to do. So if I'm going to have a sideboard sweeper, I would pay the extra mana to make sure my sweeper works.
Gotcha. Yeah. This card is very interesting to me. And the reason I did want to talk about it is that I think it scales pretty well in certain scenarios, right? So let's say a deck like Amulet Titan, they kind of have random creatures all the time. Not that you want to be triggering ETBs, but I just like the efficiency of it, and I like that it is an enchantment. We'll see, again, what will happen with those decks. Ways to add counters to this, a Teferi Time Raveler to bounce your hand and use it again later. I just think it's flexible enough that it can see play in some different areas.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as a dredge player, I could say I would be disappointed if my opponent cast this against me. So I could definitely see myself being wrong. I'm always concerned, like Bontu's Reckoning, anytime a sweeper has massive caveats.
Yeah. I do think skip your next turn is a little worse than this will eventually happen, but I totally get it. And yeah, it really just depends. Can you wait that extra turn to just play Wrath of God or whatever?
For sure.
Take a start on this card.
Our next card that we have listed here to talk about is Prismatic Ending. This is a sorcery X white. Converge, exile target non-land permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of colors spent to cast this spell. So for 5 mana, exile 5-drop, and it scales downward from there.
So yeah, this is essentially, pay 2 to exile a 1-drop, and then it has kicker 1 for each, additional mana you add. But it does have to be colors. So it is interesting to see,
it's actually...
Is it colors, right? Yeah.
It's colors, but it's actually pay 2 to exile a 2-drop because it counts the white
or less. It's or less. Excellent. Okay. So yeah, that is a good rate then. It is a sorcery. So that's, I do see a lot of people getting excited about this. And this again points to the fact, I mentioned a few times that, oddball permanents are not hard to deal with anymore. And I do like the fact that this one can be snapcasted as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think do you think this make a big impact, or what do you think about splashes in there?
I think it'll make a moderate impact. If I'm playing at least a 2-color control deck, I would play one or maybe 1 or 2. Depends on how many counter spells I'm running. If I'm playing like the hard part is you can't get it off like Niv Mizzet, so I think it'll get some play, but I think it might honestly be more of a sideboard card.
Yeah. The interesting thing to me is that the more removal spells you add, the worse meddling mages, so that's always something I keep back in my mind as far as how playable is this in comparison to the other ones that are extremely similar, and this one fits the bill.
Like a white-black deck could play this Fatal Push and Blood Chief's Thirst to have 3 ways to answer a meddling mage, so it's really impossible for them to name the right card.
Yeah, and then this also takes out the Aether Vial if you want to do that. So I love the flexibility, and I do think it'll see play in fair decks. So our next card is very interesting. It's called Resurgent Belief. It's a sorcery with no mana cost. It does have Suspend 2, and that cost is 1 and a white. Return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then auras, let's see, the reminder text is auras with nothing to enchant remain in your graveyard. So no auras unless they enchant something. So very interesting reminder.
Yeah. I think this card's incredibly powerful, and we've talked about before. There's a very clear enchantment deck floating around. Suspend 2 really isn't that bad. So even if you need to suspend it for whatever reason, because the game's going long and you just top deck this, then it's fine. But I don't see where it's going to be yet, but I definitely think it'll be somewhere. I think it's going to be really strong. And keep in mind that we do have some enchantments that cascade. So we have like Ardent Play and stuff. So that fits into the deck on its own naturally.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the more breakable cards we've talked about thus far. I obviously, it doesn't slot into anywhere that is existing now, so we'll just have to see what people can do with it. Yeah, but yeah, the rate on this thing is incredible. The fact that suspending on turn 2 and you're going off turn 4 is great. It gives you time to set up, and your clock is still totally reasonable by modern standards.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that.
So
The next card, though.
Our next one is humans are still a deck in the formats. We have Sanctifier Invec, white, human cleric, protection from black and red, which is annoying. When Sanctifier Invec enters the battlefield, exile all cards that are black or red from all graveyards. If a black or red permanent spell or card would be put into onto the battlefield,
it says not on the battlefield.
Oh my goodness. If a black or red permanent spell or card not on the battlefield will be put into the graveyard, exile instead. I knew how it worked in my head, and I did not shorthand it correctly.
Yeah, so it doesn't exile from the battlefield, but any other black and red cards going to the bin are gone. That's a lot of words, my friend.
It's a good hate there. I don't know if it replaces a Warlock champion, but
I think it just depends. If it's burn, no. If it's dredge, yes. So it really just depends on what you're looking at. The message that this and the other humans have sent to me is that WotC has kind of removed their fear of printing powerful cards. Before, it seemed obvious to me that they would print standard cards that would normally be a human, but they'd make them some weird thing so that they could stop making powerful humans. And with Modern Horizons 2, they let that go, and now there's going to be just an overabundance. Our next card is Sarah's Emissary, Angel, 4 and triple white for 7/7 flying. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a card type. You and creatures you control have protection from the chosen card type. This could be the new Reanimator target for Modern.
It is phenomenal. Yeah, this is the Reanimator target for Modern. You Valakut decks, you name land. Any tribal creature deck, you just name that. You name human, you name elf. There's the decks that it doesn't work against, so the decks where you're boarding it out or not boarding it in, depending on how you have the deck built anyway. But it's great.
Yeah, I think this is pretty much a brick wall against, non-control decks, really. A lot of combo decks are going to struggle with it too. You get to choose whatever their win condition is, and they can't get you. And then, creature battles, you play this, you don't take damage from the creatures, and they can't block yours. So that seems like a hard card to beat. So we'll just see, if Reanimator is going to be playable. I'm sure this will show up here and there, and other format Reanimator decks, but this could certainly be the thing they need to get off.
Yeah, Storm, you name sorcery, and then now they have to empty the warrens, and so then you get to untap and figure out what to do whenever they do that.
Yeah, so totally. What's our next one?
So our next card is Solitude. This is one of our elemental incarnations, which we'll talk about as a whole at the end of the episode, but let's go and talk about the individual card now. And this is a 3 white with flash, lifelink, 3/2. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you exile up to one target creature. That creature's controller gains life equal to its power. You can evoke it by exiling a white card from your hand.
Yeah, so this card, Force of Swords really is what it is.
Yeah.
Plus, it's got a 5-drop body attached sometimes. Are you going to do that?
This is one of those cards. I think this one goes into... I don't think you're playing this in any linear deck. So, I don't think I'm playing in anything super aggressive. But if I'm playing something taxes or control that is designed to kind of go through the long cycle of the game, so eventually I can realistically cast it regularly, it's a good safety valve. But it's also, it's a pretty average card against certain situations. So, yeah, I definitely see it in some play, but I don't think it's going to be insane.
Yeah, I don't think it's insane. With free spells, you tend to immediately think, oh, this could be busted. But I think, it's a fair price to pay. You 2-for-1 yourself to get a sword. I think this could allow, those blue-white control decks to move into a greedier direction where they can play more card advantage and, spend turns casting Fact Fictions and then using these free spells and cheap spells to keep up tempo-wise. So that's where I see it, and I don't really see it outside of then. I don't see it breaking anything or making creatures playable.
No, I don't think so either. The fact that it has flash is its biggest selling factor.
Totally, and that will be our last white card, so we get to move on to blue. Thank God. White is over. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. We could talk about some magic cards now. So our first card is Fractured Sanity. It's a sorcery for triple blue. Each opponent mills 14 cards. It has cycling for 1 of the blue. When you cycle it, each opponent mills 4 cards. Is this the final mill piece we needed?
I think it actually might be. I don't think Mill's gonna be tier 1, but I think like taking Mill to an event because you like to play Mill is more viable. Because I've seen a lot of people playing so far Mill hosting some 4 and 5 win leagues. The rate's really good, and the fact it has this cycling clause if you need something else, I think is there. So I don't think Mill's suddenly real, but I think this card is exactly what it wants to at least level up somewhat.
Yeah, I don't think this helps Mill that much. I think there are Mill cards that are on this level already that are not seeing play. There's one, I forget the name, it's Mind Tomb or something, where they have to mill 4 lands, and it costs 3, and they don't play that one anymore, so I don't see this really seeing play, honestly.
Interesting.
If you can mill yourself, I would be in for Dredge. You can mill yourself.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, for sure. I think the fact that it's only opponents is rough, but if there's a Mill deck, so on the spectrum of does Mill get better? Yes. Is it a deck you still want to take to a GP? No.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So our next one we have is Murktide Regent, 5 blue with Delve with a flying 3/3 dragon. When Murktide Regent enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each instant or sorcery card exiled with it. Whenever an instant or sorcery card leaves your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Murktide Regent.
This card strikes me as absurdly good.
Yeah. This makes me feel like it's a Tasigur Phoenix-esque payoff. And it's also really important to know that, like, you know, after it's in play, you can play it as an 8/8 with flying. And then if you Snapcaster Mage a spell, it becomes a 9/9. If you Delve another spell, it becomes a 10/10. Like, I think it's insane so far.
Yeah, it's really going to be, you know, how earlier people are going to be able to consistently cast this. You know, we're going to probably get to see a return of Thought Scour to Modern. Because this is the type of card that can break an archetype. You know, we saw Treasure Cruise break Delver. Obviously, I will say that card is much better than this one, but, you know, this is up there. 2 mana, 8/8 flyer, you know, a Stubborn Denial deck, you know, a counter spell deck. It's perfect. You know,
best comparison is its Hogak. It's another cheap 8/8.
Yeah, cheap 8/8, and this one has flying.
Yeah.
And, you know, so... Yeah,
it's also not legendary, so it's kind of interesting that, like, if you can put it in play fast, and then your like blue-white opponent or your white-black opponent draws their Rest in Peace trying to shut down your graveyard, they risk just making this thing like insane.
Totally, that's true. Yeah, if you get Rest in Peace after the fact, the thing just goes off.
So
I'll just be excited. You know, maybe some creature deck that's got like 12 creatures. You got the Regent, you got Pyromancer and Delver, and then a whole bunch of really, you know, great spells. You get Counterspell in that shell, so we could certainly see, you know, a blue-red tempo or some blue tempo deck making splash.
I think it's like Phoenix, Regent, and Snapcaster Mage, and then it's burn spells and loot spells, and that's your shell.
Ban Faithless Looting in business. So I you know, this is the kind of card I see, and I go, yeah, I want to brew around that. And I'm actually, for our next card, I'm actually going to walk us back, because you did a little skip in there, buddy. We got to read Inevitable Betrayal, which is a sorcery with no mana cost. Suspend 3. The suspend cost is 1 blue, and you can just search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that card in the battlefield under your control, then they shuffle. Very powerful free spell.
Oh, yeah. I wish it's just creature, right? So we can't get Planeswalker or anything. No. So probably not main deck, because there are going to be some decks where there's not a creature that's worth going to get, and you don't want to cascade into this. But if you're playing a deck that's made to take advantage of some of these suspend cards, it seems sweet.
Yeah, I could see, you know, the As Foretold decks getting better and playing this card somewhere in the 75. Totally.
I've been working on As Foretold for a while, and like you bring this in with As Foretold against Primetime. Ooh,
that was what I was thinking. Primeval Titan.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if you could do anything, Tron would have been my first bet there. But yeah, we'll see. I don't think it's going to really do much, but it would be.
Oh yeah, for sure. So our next one, after we get back on track the right way,
Back in alphabetical order. He tried to go
back in
decimal.
alphabetical order.
It's okay. We still love
I'm like I said, dyslexic brother. I'm just going along the way the words look. All right, so we have Rise and Shine. 1 and a blue sorcery. Target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature with 4+1/+1 counters on it. For each put 4+1/+1 counters on it on each artifact that became a creature this way. Oh, because you overload. Okay.
Yeah,
so then
I
we
was
got
like,
overload.
why is he stumbling on this? And then I read along with you. I did not realize that this thing, the overload on this, which costs 4 blue, is outrageous.
Yeah. The templating on it, I was like, oh, it just sounds like the fairy that from the Eldraine set, but they templated it for the overload aspect. So overload 6 mana, you make a bunch of like mana rocks. Unfortunately, it doesn't untap them.
It does not untap them. This card is extremely interesting to me. I think, the front half is not horrible. It's worse than something like Insult Artifact just because it's a little bit smaller. But the fact that you can overload it later is extremely powerful. And then, I thought it was going to be all 4/4s, and I still thought that was pretty good. But now the fact that it's going to be all 20/20s or 30/30s or whatever, that makes this card a lot more intriguing to me.
So they will all be 4/4s because you just put 4 counters on each creature that's animated.
Excuse me. Okay. So
yeah,
I read
but
it
it's
wrong,
still,
but the same way. Okay.
Yeah.
So but it still is okay.
Yeah, if you make a bunch of clues and treasures and you place them in Springleaf drums, like not unreasonable if you can find a way to cheat the overload aspect for you to be able to just like turn a bunch of because normally this kind of effect excludes tokens if you're going to be able to do a mass effect. But this one, because it doesn't exclude tokens, if you have like random clues, those clues can rumble.
Yeah, and it will not buff the creatures, which is unfortunate because where I saw this was more an affinity creature shell. Yeah, I mean, the card that comes to mind when I see this is Pentad Prison. It ramps this card out too. It's going to turn into a 4/4, so maybe there is something there with doing some type of eggs shenanigans or things like that. There's a lot of cards in Modern that don't see play just because they're waiting for something. This is the kind of card that can put a strategy like that in.
For sure.
Our next card, though, is going to slot right into a tier 85 deck, and that's Rishadan Dockhand. Single blue for a 1/2 Merfolk Island Walk. Pay 1 and tap it to tap target land. Oh!
I've been of the somewhat controversial opinion that I think Rishadan Port for a while I've been saying like I think it'd be fine in Modern. It's really slow, and if you don't have the turn 1 8th revival and you start trying to port people, then you're not doing anything. But I think this will help the Merfolk decks. I think you might see it in non-Merfolk decks that just are trying to play tax-ish effects and like Stoneforge Mystics. So just this with Stoneforge Mystic seems like a decent start to a shell on its own. But I definitely think it'll help decks. I don't think it's going to be a card that we're going to regret printing, especially because it's very fragile.
I think it does have the ability to regret printing because when I think about Merfolk, the scary stuff is truly, spreading seas and the effects that turn your lands into islands. Because otherwise, they're playing 3/3s and whatever, and they play a guy that makes them tokens. So this is the exact kind of card they need. Their 1-drop suck, and they like messing with your land. So I think this will propel Merfolk back into playability. I really do.
I'm on board. And they have some pretty good spells, so I'm 100% on board that I will be excited to see Merfolk be playable.
Totally. And I'm going to take the next card again because it's yet another card that I wanted to review, but you didn't. And that's a sweet enchantment called Scuttle Tide. Costs 1 and a blue. You pay 1 and discard a card to create a 0/3 blue crab creature token. And this enchantment has the ability of Delirium. Crabs you control get +1/+1 as long as there are 4 more card types in your graveyard. I want to talk about this because this is a very powerful engine card.
For sure. So I think it's a very powerful engine. I just don't know if there's better ways to do what we're wanting to do. Like I'm not a big fan of having to pay to discard. The 0/3 doesn't mean a ton. That being said, like I can see myself as a dredge player. The problem is, do I want to play this or Shriekhorn? I don't think this replaces Shriekhorn for me. But the effect is strong if you're wanting stuff in your graveyard.
Yeah. To me, the reason I want to talk about this is when you see a card that basically is an entire strategy in itself, I think you always have to take a good look at it. Because all this needs is a little bit of help to make this ability completely busted. So you're discarding Madness cards, discarding Dredge cards, You have other ways to pump your tokens out, things like that. And so, you mentioned Dredge. I wouldn't be surprised to see this be a sideboard card because it is one of those cards that can win the game by itself. That being said, if they already have something like a recipe, this isn't really going to help you. So maybe it comes in more creature matches where you need to go wide and things like that. But I think I just wanted to mention this because it is extremely powerful, and I would hate to ignore it because it could do something. You just got to give them the right toys to play with.
For sure. So our next one we have is Subtlety. This is our blue version of the Elemental Incarnation. It's 2 blue with another flash elemental. This one is flying. And when it enters the battlefield, choose up to 1 target creature spell or planeswalker spell. Its owner puts it on top or bottom of their library. You can evoke it by exiling a blue card from your hand, and it's a 3/3. So nothing in play, only if it's on the stack.
Correct. And this is a card that I think they did a really good job of wording this. And I think it's obvious to me of reading this that they did a lot of iterations on this just because it's so specific as to what it does. So I think they probably went through, counter those type of spells, that type of thing. But the fact that they can still have it later if they want is good. But also, it's been a long time since we had more, memory lapse type effects in Modern. So I'm interested to see if they still hold up.
Yeah, the fact they get to choose to put on the bottom, kind of like Aether Gust, you don't get to lock people with that memory lapse. I would have been interested to see if they added this text, if it could hit anything. It's still probably too good. At 4 mana for a 3/3 flasher, I think that is a piece that you can realistically scale into casting it, and the evoke is more like an oh crap button. But I think it's decent for what it does.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it's just a tool that'll see play. I see this more as a role player. And again, like we talked about the white one earlier, whose name I already forget. If maybe these blue-white decks can get to a point where they get to play a lot of free spells, subtlety, force of negation, things like that, and then it allows them to kind of just take their time and do their thing, and that's how they hang on. I could see this playing a role in that selling.
Yeah, there's a blue-white enchantment that you can only cast 1 spell turn, and whenever you cast a spell, you get to draw a card that we'll see a little bit later, and those do mitigate some of these evoke costs of you losing resources.
Oh yeah, totally. And if you're a draw go deck, then that's fine.
Oh yeah.
So I'll take us to our next card, which is the instant called Suspend. Costs a single blue. Exile target creature and put 2 time counters on it. If it doesn't have Suspend, it gains Suspend. Pretty unique quote unquote removal spell here.
Yeah, this is the kind of unsummon I want to see. It works really well with like a Drannith Magistrate or a Teferi. It gives you 2 turns, which is typically enough. Technically, you get like 1 turn because they're going to miss their turn. Now on the next turn, they're going to cast it. So if it has haste, whatever. But you have some other things you can do to make it permanently go away. I think the card is just really clean answer. If you're not playing like a path.
Yeah, this gives blue access to a reasonable, removal spell early in the game. So mono blue decks, green decks that need something early to stem the bleeding, stop a Sprite Dragon from getting out of control too early. I think this will slot into a lot of decks.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a lot of people's, go-to removal spell. Maybe fast combo decks that just need something, but other than that, yeah, I see it being a pretty nice role player here.
I agree. So for our next one, we have our one true Merfolk God. Mm-hmm. This is Svelun of Sea and Sky. 1 blue. It's a 3/4 legendary creature Merfolk God. She is indestructible as long as you control at least 2 other Merfolk. Whenever she attacks, you get to draw a card. Other Merfolk you control have Ward 1, which Ward says that if a spell or ability targets that creature, it's countered unless that controller pays 1.
Yeah, so, Merfolk finally get their true Kira, They don't have to play Kira Great Glass Spinner. They get to play completely busted on theme God now.
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of the Merfolk decks that had been floating around in Modern were blue-white with the Luros and the Modern Horizons one that gave things Kira effects. This
thing has a lot of text, and it protects itself and your other Merfolk, which is crazy.
And it also gives you some card advantage because as long as you have 2 other Merfolk, she's indestructible, so you can freely swing and just keep ripping cards. And a 3/4 for 3 is exactly what they want against like burn decks.
Absolutely. And Merfolk is a deck that needs to keep its pieces on the battlefield. So you have the fact it dodges bolt, so you don't mind spending 3 mana into it. It gains card back. It's freaking indestructible. Anyone mention that? Jeez.
Yes. Yeah. She protects the things around her. I think she's great.
So yeah, if Merfolk make a comeback, this card will be in the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Our next card is going to be our first affinity for artifacts keyword we're going to see, and that's going to be Thought Monitor. Costs 6 and a blue for a 2/2 flying artifact creature. It is a construct, has affinity for artifacts, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards. Do you think this could breathe some new life into Affinity?
I think so, because I think I played Affinity through many, many different iterations, and there were times when Thoughtcast was in there, and the problem was you had to say, well, we can only run so many non-threats, and Thoughtcast doesn't progress us to winning the game very efficiently, so we had to cut it out for other things. So now we get to have a Thoughtcast that can rumble and can trigger some effects. So if Affinity can come back, I think this has a chance to be like a 2 of part of it. The 6 Affinity cost is pretty high, but I do see it getting some play.
Yeah. This is a card I see helping Affinity kind of redefine itself in, a post-Mox Opal Modern, and that it's going to be the grindy aggro deck, the deck that can deal with 5-6 removal spells, the deck that can deal with 2 sweepers, the deck that can deal with sideboard cards, and this card does all that stuff. So I think if Affinity is going to be a high tier again, this card's going to be a 4 of.
Yeah, no,
and it's just going to change the flavor of the deck. We're not going to be blitz you, play 7 cards turn 1. We're still going to be trying to signal pest to power these things, but we're going to have more gas in the tank. The Mishra's Factory that we saw earlier gives you, 12 artifact creature lands. So that's a lot of, fodder you can leave behind cranials and just giving you more gas to keep the artifact count high.
Oh yeah, I agree. I would love to see Affinity get back on the map.
Awesome. So break me off with another scary Merfolk.
All right, so this Merfolk's pretty interesting. This is a Tide Shaper. It's 1 blue with a kicker of 1. It's a 1/1 Merfolk wizard. So it's also wizard tribal. When Tide Shaper enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target land becomes an island for as long as Tide Shaper remains on the battlefield. Tide Shaper gets +1/+1 as long as an opponent controls an island. So it kind of turns itself into a 2/2.
Yeah, so you will not be paying this for 1 very often. 2 mana 2/2, your land as an island is quite good. And
we get to have 8 Spreading Seas in our deck now.
Yeah, you get to play Tide Shaper. You can even play, there's a bad one that costs 1 and doesn't draw a card, where, that thing, it's like you get to a certain threshold and it's just really hard to do. Yeah. So, again, this is another piece to a puzzle. I think Merfolk's going to be good again.
I think so, too. There's a lot of gold cards floating around, and so just the more that Merfolk could just lock lands down on turn 2, turn 3, with the the dock hand and this, and Spreading Seas, like Merfolk, I think, is really fighting back, and they also have a lot of pitch a card interaction spells that allow them to progress without having to worry about tapping the mana. Very legacy-like.
Totally, yeah, they can do that too. They're going to be able to play a lower land count if they want, and yeah, we're just getting to a mass of cards that Merfolk really needed. They needed to get 2-drop. More Merfolk that mess with their lands is great. Having your island walk turned on is going to help in all the creature matchups, and yeah, I like the future.
Yeah.
But that is our last blue card, unfortunately. Everybody in the peanut gallery can cry now that the favorite color Magic is gone. But now we're in black, and we're going to talk about Archon of Cruelty, 6BB for a 6/6 Archon. Has flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card and loses 3 life. You draw a card and gain 3 life. So this is another card I could see as a potential reanimator.
Yeah, I think as a reanimator target, it's definitely good. I not putting it on my list of cards I'm seeing impacting Modern heavily, only because I think there's a lot of other targets that win the game on the spot. Whereas this one, you're reanimating it and then swinging a couple times before your opponent concedes. I think with like Protean Hulk and with the Angel, against a lot of decks, you resolve some of those and it's just over.
Yeah, that is true. There are certainly more clear paths to killing your opponent immediately after you reanimate. But those decks are always looking for one of sideboard things they can board in that will be good in certain scenarios. And I can certainly see this being, like the Jun slot. Like I need something against Jun that even if it dies, I still got a head, I can still win the game. And if unchecked, it will win the game like the next turn. So I think that checks those boxes, which is why it was a card I wanted to talk about, because I do believe we can see this entering the battlefield low cost
sure.
2 mana once we get deeper into black.
Yeah. So our next card on the list we have is Break the Ice, black sorcery, destroy target land that is snow or could produce colorless mana, overload for 4 black.
Boom! Take out your whole Tron, whole thing. Think that's gonna happen?
I don't think you're ever going to overload this. At least not very consistently. Maybe the game is way over and somebody should have already conceded a long time ago. But I think it just goes in the list of we have yet another thing that's going to hold down Tron, and none of those things have officially held down Tron in the past. I think its biggest play is what it does to Eldrazi Tron. I think that's a pretty big beating because all their lands are colorless. So it literally is just 2 mana destroy any land. But I don't see it being, which we'll talk about a little later. I don't see it being like on the list of cards. It's like, well, do you remember that old Tron deck nobody plays? This is one of the reasons. I don't think that's going to really be the case.
Yeah, I don't think, and again, like you said, we'll talk about more cards later. I don't think any of these cards are nailed in the coffin, but it is bad for Tron for more things to have reasonable access to, hate against. And, Damping Sphere kind of does that already, so I think I'm on board with you as far as Break the Ice is concerned. My thing is, this card should have been in fucking Modern Horizons 1.
Oh, yeah.
Because around that time, Snow, Urza, and Tron were like the best 2 decks, and so this would have been nice to have then. I don't think it really stopped anything, but...
Yeah, I don't know what the quality is for these kinds of cards. I think the biggest negative for Tron is that it does mean across the color pie, we have answers.
Yeah.
And the answers aren't just a dampening sphere that if they destroy, they're back online. Like, these are answers it's like they have to battle back from. Right. And so I think spreading across color pie is the biggest fear I have as someone who owns Tron.
All right, and our next card I love because it's got such a simple name. And that name is Damn! Sorcery for black. Destroy target creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated. And it has overload for 2 white. People are hype about this card, Sean.
I think this card's sweet. The sorcery is disappointing, but you have to because of the overload aspect. Mana's very intensive, but man, this card is just well designed. Like you want. That's what I've been saying every time I've talked about any kind of like mid-range control deck. You need scalability. Modern's so linear. You have to make sure that you don't have a bunch of dead cards in your hand all the time. So like this is the kind of sweeper I'm looking at because in the early game, if I'm desperate, I could just 1-for-1. And as the game progresses, I can scale up and really punish an opponent.
Yeah, I think this card is extremely powerful. I do like that it is essentially, murder/wrath. It's going to be a problem for all these tribal decks we see that look like they're going to gain playability because this card just kind of does it all. The downside of Wrath is sometimes you have to spend 4 mana to kill a 1-drop. This avoids that totally.
Oh, yeah.
And I like that, if you're playing an Esper deck with Snapcasters, this thing just does so much. You can hold it, Wrath, next turn, snap, kill your follow-up. So really efficient, really powerful. It definitely shows that they're willing to make, strict upgrade to beloved cards. And I like that. Let's go. It's 2021.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So another card, similar casting cost, black, for Dothy Voidwalker. This is Dothy Rogue, 3/2 with Shadow, which we don't see a lot of. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a void counter on it. You could tap the Voidwalker and sacrifice it to choose an exiled card an opponent controls with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost.
Yeah, so the first time I read this card, I thought it was the best 2-drop I had ever seen. And I said, you know what? I probably didn't read that right. Let me read it. And I took care to read it again slowly and carefully, every word, every letter. And I thought, no, that's probably only the second best 2-drop I've ever seen. So now I look at it and I still think that card is extremely powerful, but how are we going to make it work? What do you think
Yeah.
about this card?
I think it's phenomenal. The problem is so its play style is to play a longer game. The more you play the game, the more cards that get void counters on it, the better it gets because the more choice you get. So you're not putting this in a deck that's trying to linearly win and combo off on somebody. You're putting this in a deck where you're grinding people or you're more mid-range, and you're able to convert it into something better. But I do think it's amazing. And the fact that Shadow, I think you're going to get more people by just attacking with a 3/2 Shadow for 2 than you're going to ever get by activating it. I think the activation is an outlet, not a primary feature.
Got you. So I see it the other way. I see this more as I'm trying to get the ability, and the fact that I have an unblockable threat early is a bonus. And the reason is because the second line of text, if a card we put to opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it with the void counter means I want to play this guy, and then I want to be thought seizing your biggest card in your whole deck and then playing it. That's what I want to be doing with this guy.
Yeah, so I think that's a big piece, and I think the card's going to shift, and that's why I think it's, in my opinion, it's the best 2-drop I've seen besides maybe Snapcaster, but it might actually be better than Snapcaster. And that is because, like, in some decks where they're not doing anything cool with their graveyard, they're not having any insane spells, they're a tribal deck, for example, you're racing them with a 2-drop 3/2. Against a deck with Primetime or against a deck with, like, Dredge. Then with Dredge, you're not going to activate the ability. With Primetime, you might. But Dredge, this is a rest in peace that attacks. With the Primetime deck, this is a thing that it gets to attack. And then as soon as you get a hold of one of the Primetimes, you get to Primetime first. So like, it's so flexible in what it does, getting to be the aggressive card, getting to be the hate fair card, or getting to be like your own steal your combo card. That I'm blown away. I would not have been surprised if they made this a mythic to make the value of the set go up. I wouldn't have been surprised.
Yeah, I think I'm surprised it's not a mythic. I think maybe there might have been some last minute adjustments to make this a little more powerful, or maybe in testing it's not as good as we think it is. But I'm reading the card again, and when you read cards, you imagine what you can do with them, and I'm reading it to look for restrictions to make sure I can't do things I want. And another thing this does against is the sacrifice ability can be used as an instant. And so against blue decks, you can just hold up a counterspell with this guy.
That's true.
Against decks with big spells that, maybe a big spell resolves and it doesn't kill you or whatever, you can immediately cast a spell on their turn. And so, yeah, this card does a lot. I see it personally in something like a Black Red Arcanist style deck where, you have the discard, you have maybe an Unearth or two in the deck, you get it back and you again, and you have Luris and all these things where it just fits into that game plan perfectly. So that's really probably where I'm going to start brewing in Modern because I think this card's outrageous.
Yeah, I think the evasiveness is phenomenal, and I kind of looked at it originally. It's just like against a lot of decks, it's a 3/2 with evasion, and then against some other decks, it's rest in peace that rumbles, and it seems insane.
Yes, and for our next card, we probably have what was the most hyped card of the set upon its debut, and that's going to be Grief. It's a Elemental Incarnations, like we talked about earlier. This one costs 2 BB. It's a 3/2 menace. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, and they discard it. And its evoke cost is to exile a black card from your hand. So the first time I read it, I forgot the evoke requires you to sacrifice the creature afterwards. So for about 30 minutes, I was under the impression that this was the best Magic card I had ever read in my life.
I think it's phenomenal. I think it's by a large margin the best of these elementals because out of all the elementals, and we'll see the red and green later, but out of all the elementals, it is the only one that is on turn 1. The other elementals are dependent on your opponent doing things that you then need to interact with. Your opponent's always going to have a hand on turn 1, so you could always use this on turn 1. So I look at this card and I go, okay, so this is something that is unmasked, which is great. And I also see a card like Ephemerate, and I see white-black decks that are close, that are really good at taxing the linear combo decks. And they already have a lot of those interaction pieces. And you want to run the Ephemerate sometimes to blank removal. And so now we get to do that with this card. So we just play Concealed Courtyard, exile a black card from my hand, play the Grief, blink it immediately, take 2 cards out of their hand. On my next turn, take a 3rd card. And so, like, that's not a very hard hand to put together. The biggest thing with it is that all the other elementals are requiring your opponent to invest resources, which is not happening as fast as you need it to be for you to really consistently say, I want this card in my main deck. This is the elemental I want in my main.
Yeah, I totally agree. In comparison to the other ones, this one is significantly better because it is proactive, like you said, and it doesn't ask anything other than you have an opponent across for it to be good. And I see this in a shell. Any black creature deck shell is going to want something like this because in Modern the decks are so specific that you're going to have a chunk of dead cards like pretty often, and so you're not even going to be getting 2 for 1 all the time. And so 0 mana, 1.5 myself, or even it's, if you're pitching a fatal push against a combo deck, then you didn't even 2 for 1 yourself. It's got the free unmask. And so, yeah, I don't even know that you need ways to be tricky with this for it to be great. I think you just need ways to, sustain the card flow so that when you do this, you're not just out of gas. So I look at this, I think about cards like Dark Confidant. I think about, any Read the Bone style card. And again, this is another effect that control decks can put in, use their mana to counter you and draw cards, and, use free spells to mess with them. So it's interesting to see if there's going to be any deck that can take advantage, a big pile of them, maybe some gold cards. Maybe, there's an Esper Ephemerate that plays all 12 of them. Esper Charms, whatever other goofy stuff, and make it work that way.
Yeah.
So a lot of cool things coming out of these things.
I agree. And I think this is the only one that just right off the bat, I'm like, okay, I want 4 of these in my main deck. And also of note, this takes away your opponent's ability to interact with you before they've played a land, and it triggers your Vengevines. So the evoke is pretty important from that aspect.
Yeah, totally true. Let's not harp on this guy too long, although I'm sure we want.
Oh, yeah. So our next one we have is one that you marked, and I'm less sold on, but I could see being wrong, and I'd love to be sold, is this Kitchen Imp. 3 and a black for a 2/2 flying and haste with a madness of a single black.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this because this card is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
A single black for flying haste 2/2, that card is obviously too good to print. And so if you can make a way for this to be that all the time, it's quite good. And you just mentioned the word Vengevine. This is where I see this kind of card going,
For sure.
Single black flying threat.
Yeah, and when I look at it, my big thing whenever I'm evaluating these is like, is this a unique thing that I think is going to turn on a deck? And I put no on any card where I'm like, we can do this with other cards. It might be slightly better than another card, but it's not notably better enough to where I'm like, suddenly I see it on the wall. And so I think the card's great, and I think we could see it going that way. I think we have another Madness card that costs a black to put into play that we'll see later that I think I would want to have more than this. So I think this is more of a limited piece for the Madness deck, and we have other cards that do similar effects that have more text boxes that make me more believer that I'll see those cards in a deck than this one.
Yeah, I just think the rate is good enough that if you need this kind of thing, you will not be sad to even play it. But I certainly don't see it do anything splashy. Yeah. The next one card has a lot of text, so let's get to that one. It's Necrogoyf, 3 black for a star for Lurgoyf. Necrogoyf's power is equal to the number of future cards in all graveyards. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card, and it has madness of 1 black. What do you see with this rare here?
So I can see it either being insane, if we can consistently turn on the madness, because it is taking cards away from your opponent while also representing a threat and fueling your other madness cards. But I also could see it being a bulk rare. Because if you can't get that madness effect at 5 mana, it's not good enough. If somebody plays Rest in Peace, it's just a discard effect over and over again. So I think it's good, but I don't see it like storming the format.
Yeah, I see this as, a role I mentioned earlier of like that little more expensive card to top things off coming from the sideboard. And that's kind of where I see this. I like that its mana cost is reasonable and that, they get the discard first, if you're playing this on your turn. So I think you could see a splash here and there, but I definitely don't see any decks built around this or any deck featuring heavily, really.
Yeah. So our next one we have is Persist, which is a 1 and a black sorcery Return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. It continues the cycle we had in blue with Suspend, Persist. It takes a keyword mechanic and makes a spell out of it.
Yeah, and they did a great job with this one. I love the flavor of this one that comes back with -1/-1 counter, and the art shows something from Lorwyn or Shadowmoor or whatever looking Persist thing. So yeah, I mean, this is now, the premier, I guess you could say, reanimator spell in Modern. Gorya's Vengeance would be the next thing rate-wise, but this can bring it back forever.
Yeah, the non-legendary is big. So the most popular reanimation targets are legendary. So a lot of the reanimation targets we talked about previously, we've had to kind of mention this one against this match, this against that match versus legendary ones. You're normally reanimating Grizzlebrand and Emrakul because it's just plain powerful.
Right.
So this one enforces you to track the metagame, switch what your animation targets are, know which ones you want and win because they're not all universally effective.
Right. And I like that. I don't like having a universal answer like Grizzlebrand when you go, what am I going to reanimate? Okay, this one's obviously way better than anything else. So we'll go that way. As far as the animator goes, I don't see enough tools yet, but I would like there to be there. This is a set when you read through it and you go, man, I wish we still had Faithless Looting, but they knew that it was banned, I believe, timeline-wise before the set. Was under development, so that probably allowed for, a card like this to get printed in the first place. So, I welcome it. I love reanimator strategy, so I would like for this to be played.
Yeah, I'm all in.
Our next card is Profane Tutor, no mana cost. Again, one of our Suspend cards. The Suspend is 2, and it costs 1 and a black. And it's a simply Demonic Tutor. Search your library for a card, put in your hand.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a text box.
Yeah, not a lot to go into it. I think it's great if you can find a way to cheat it in. Even if you can't cheat it in, you just suspend this as soon as you have 2 extra mana, and then you go find whatever the best card in the best situation is. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah, again, this is one of the suspend cards that you're not sad if you have to suspend it. Assuming it's on time. I think any later than turn 2, you're going to be slow most of the time. So, but I love that, it comes off on turn 4. And so if you need to find one more piece to get there, it's there. And, we're getting to kind of a mass of these free suspend cards that are making Ask for Told looking pretty scary.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad I have my 4.
Yeah, and then, this thing scales with Ask for Told because, the more counters on Ask for Told, wider that this card's going to be and the better it's going to get. So I'm really interested to see where the Ask for Told deck lands. It's kind of getting pulled in a few different directions, but a lot of those directions are looking at spicy.
Yeah. Well, the best thing you can do with Ask for Told is use this to go get a second Ask for Told, so you can start using multiple times.
That's probably true. You're probably right.
Yeah.
It'll probably most often be getting, the Ancestral Vision to make your deck keep working.
Oh, yeah. So our next one, this one is one that I have a yes on just because of the effect to it. So this is Sudden Edict, 1 and a black instant. It's just a verdict. Target player sacrifices a creature, but it has split second. I think that split second text is important enough against some combo decks, against some Boggles decks that might be worth more than like a Liliana's Triumph.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to see, any main deck play, really. I think it will see, sideboard play when it's necessary. It'll be every once in a while. I see this as something that would prevent, something like, a Grixis Death Shadow style deck from resurging, a deck that wants to put a big threat and hold up counters. This card is really good against those decks. So, it'll be a blowout when it's good, but other than that, I see it, laying in the sideboard or, in the proxy cards, really.
Oh, yeah.
But we do have a spicy legend up next. His name's Torok. Does that ring any bells there? Dread Cantor, costs 1 and a black. It is a legendary human cleric, 2/1. Pro white, whenever an opponent discards a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Torok, Dread Cantor. And it has the kicker of black to, when it enters the battlefield, cast him to Torok on your opponent. They discard 2 cards at random. Is this thing going to be fast enough to get people in Modern?
I think the reason we'll play this in Modern is because it's a scalable effect for Luros decks. The fact that your Thought Seasons and things continue to grow this creature are really good. And discard at random is just something to never blink against. So if you're a deck that can stop the linear broken decks and slow them down, then this card can take over. If you're a deck that doesn't have enough interaction, then I think it'll be too slow and you'll find yourself dying before you ever resolve it. So I think you have to build with that in mind. But the fact that it plays with Luros well is, I think, a really big piece.
Yeah, it also plays really well with other discard spells because when they discard, you put a counter on it. So, it can be the type of threat that you just put down on turn 2 and level it up every turn. It does have pro white, so you get it down against control deck or humans early, and they're going to struggle to keep up with it. And then, like I said, you follow it up with discard. You have time to get your Luris in your hand to kick it later if they're still hanging around. So, interesting card. I'm not sure how much play it'll see, but I mean, it's certainly powerful.
Oh, for sure.
I think the pro white might have a impact on how much play it's.
Yeah, I think that'll be a big piece. Just to double check, is your audio still recording?
Yeah.
Okay, mine just stopped, so I'll probably have to use your files because it's not letting me continue to record for whatever reason.
Okay, well, mine says it's still going, so we'll hope it's still going.
Cool. All right.
All right, so that's the end of black.
We have one more. We have one more.
Oh, we do, yes.
Oh, yeah. This one's a big one. This is Unmarked Grave, sorcery, 1 and a black. Search your library for a non-legendary card, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle. So Entomb for non-legendary.
So super nerfed Entomb in that it costs 1 more, it's a sorcery, and you cannot hit a myriad of cards. You can't hit Gristlebrand, you can't hit Life of the Loam, you can't hit a Grave Troll, Sinkweed Imp, whatever. So it has one purpose where Entomb did, cool things, even though its main purpose was to, Entomb Exhume, but it nerfed one. When I see the nerfing of the Reanimate spell, I want to see the better, loot spells, and looting's banned. So, I'm not sure. We might need to do better than this to make this whole thing work.
Yeah, I think we might see some play, like if you get any Hulk decks, but like, that you are spending 2 mana on a card to set up something, which is awkwardly a little slow in the format.
Yeah, I do think Protean Hulk is probably the best candidate for Unmarked Grave. So yeah, I think I agree with that, and we'll just see. They've done slower routes before with things like Footsteps with Goryo, so maybe this could work with that deck.
Yep,
I like that. So that is the black card. I misspoke. Please excuse me. I'll kick us off with red. With Blazing Rootwall, a card, a day or two into the set, we're already seeing people play on Magic Online. It's a single red for a 1/1 lizard. Has the activated ability of a red to give +2/+0 until end of turn, activate only once each turn, and it has madness of 0. So we've got, a little more red Basking Rootwall. What do you think of this guy?
I think it's not going to go into like any discard or any Vengevine-esque deck. But I do think like you have your Goblin Lore decks, and this is amazing in those kinds of decks. So I think it's a really solid tool that's going to round out lists. 0 mana spells; those are always great.
Yeah, I'll have to disagree in that I think those 2 decks will basically become one, because really all the signs are pointing towards play free or 1-drop creatures that either have madness or they benefit from that kind of thing. So I think we'll see Goblin Lore, Burning Inquiry, Vengevine, Hollow One, Street Wraith, that kind of thing. Because we've seen it before, and when you add more tools to that, it's when you make the Burning Inquiry good, that deck is very scary. So this definitely ups that count.
Oh yeah. So our next one we have reference to another card is a Bloodbraid Marauder, 1 in a red. It is a 3/1. It can't block. If you have Delirium, it has Cascade.
Yeah, and so this is a card you mark no on, and I mark yes, and that's simply because it is important to note when you have lowered the Cascade total for a format, excuse me. And so I do believe this is the first 2-mana Cascade spell we're seeing in Modern.
I believe so. Yeah, I definitely think it's good, and I think it's worth considering. My no is more of like I don't see it being worth the work to turn on. But I do think the text is something where I could definitely see that changing. Some baubles is real easy to turn on Delirium if you get a couple baubles and things.
Baubles, instant sorcery land, Seal of Fire. So I see it again in like an Arcanist style Luris deck maybe, where this thing is just big value, especially sideboard games when you get to where, against the creature decks you're all removal, against the control and combo decks you're all discard, and then this thing is just wreck and shop against those kind of decks. And I just think it just can't be ignored because we see red decks play things like Abbot of Carol Keep once in a while and some other 2-drops that are meh. And when this card is good, it is outstanding. So I think it certainly has the possibility of seeing play.
Yeah, I can see that. So our next one we have is Chef's Kiss. This is 1 red instant. Gain control of target spell that targets only a single permanent or player. Copy it, then reselect targets at random for the spell and the copy. The new targets can't be you or permanents you control. So in 1v1 Magic, I'm going to take your thing and it's going to retarget either your creature or you.
Yeah, so example, you bolt me or one of my things, I Chef's Kiss it, and I get to randomly bolt you twice or your stuff. So that's, what is that, like a 4-for-1 or something? So if you counter and it hits 2 things, it's like I saved my guy, I killed 2 of your guys and your spell. So yeah, it's like a 4-for-1. So I mean, it's gimmicky. I'm sure people will find some matchup where they want it, and it will be hilarious how busted it is. But I mean, I definitely see this more as a commander card, but it is super cool. I love it.
Yeah. Also, the awkward part is if their opponent's trying to target themselves for something like some spell, this doesn't stop that. So if there's a beneficial spell, you can't take their beneficial spell.
Well, it says if it targets only, you're right. So if it's target player draws 2, you don't get to draw. So yeah, it's definitely better against removal or anything damage based. So I don't expect to see it on anyone's table, but I'm sure there'll be a video highlight of someone getting massacred by it on camera once.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun. So our next card is Dragon's Rage Channeler, a human shaman for a single red. It's a 1/1. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Surveil 1, and it has Delirium, it gets +2/+2, has flying, and attacks each combat. So that thing levels up with the ferocity.
Yeah, I think my favorite aspect of this was, it's really good kind of Delver-esque card. And my favorite thing is a lot of times they put that attack each combat a Fable on the main text, which would have made this card probably unplayable. But the fact that it doesn't turn that ability on until it has some evasion and some pump, I like a lot. So I think this card's great.
Yeah, I think this card is fantastic. I love that you can play it on turn 1, follow it up with a bauble, and start setting up your next turn right away. I love that it fuels itself. And you're not asking much for me to play a red 1-drop and then only cast spells after that. So I totally see this fitting into like a Delver Shell like we spoke about earlier. Maybe not Prowess, because they tend to get those numbers really high these days with Prowess triggers, but maybe, totally, if they want to go back to mono red, and this could be a better 1-drop, some of the other stuff.
Yeah, I definitely think we're going to be seeing this thing around.
Yeah, and I love that, this thing fixes your draws. That's crazy powerful.
Yeah, I think that's the part not enough people talk about. The threat is less important, I think, than the fixing your draws.
Yeah, I mean, you play this turn 2 upkeep, bolt you, I need to draw land. This thing does a lot. So, yeah, I'm excited to see it. And, it's going to be, I like that it seems like every deck going forward is going to have too many choices to pick from, aside from filling out those last slots with, subpar cards. I would much rather people have more tools. Across the board. This definitely is going to be one people are playing with.
Yeah, less stock lists floating around.
Yeah.
So our next one we have the Dredge player gets to talk about Faithless Salvaging. 1 in a red instant. Discard a card, then draw a card. Rebound.
Yeah, so I'm curious, do you see this ever replacing something like Cathartic Reunion, or do we need to get to our 9th copy of that? Really?
I could see, because there's been times when Cathartic Reunion is like 2 or 3, and you're also running some Tormenting Voices, or you're running 4 Cathartic Reunions and 2 Tormenting Voices, and then against anybody with Spell Queller or Counter Magic, you board down on Cathartic Reunions, since sometimes you're not able to pitch something that you want to pitch. At instant speed, I think it's great. I think it's the upside of it, and the thing that I love about it is that because it's basically taking Tormenting Voice and splitting it across their instep and your upkeep, you don't have to have all the cards to discard right away. So you are able to discard 2 cards, draw 2 cards over time versus discard 1 card, draw 2 immediately. So I think it's going to be pretty solid. You get to pitch 2 Phoenixes off of it, draw 2 cards if all you have in your hand is your Phoenix. And then you also have, I think I think it's an adequate replacement for Faithless Looting. I don't think it's great. I don't think it replaces Cathartic Reunion outright, but I could see it having some one or two of in a Dredge deck.
Yeah, I think I see it less for Dredge because they are extremely interested in that rate of, discard 2, Dredge 3. I think you need to have that in your wheelhouse a really high percentage of the time for that deck to be even playable. So when I look at this, I definitely think more about Arclight Phoenix because that's a deck that doesn't mind taking it a little bit slower, being more selective with the discards. And also that rebound giving you a free spell, that's nice. That makes the turn 3 a lot easier, and it makes maybe something like Thing in the Ice a little bit easier to flip because you do get 2 triggers out of it. Obviously, it is no Faithless Looting, and I don't see this spawning new decks or anything like that, but I can see it being played here. But it definitely is kind of rough.
Yeah.
Our next one is a Flame Tongue Yearling, a Kavu that costs red, 2/1. It's got multi-kicker of 2. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each time you kicked it, and also when it enters, it deals its damage to equal to its power to target creature. So we kind of have a scaled down Flame Tongue Kavu. You see this thing making any impact in Modern?
I could see it being in the sideboard if I'm on burn and Elves wakes up. I could see them boarding this in. You just get to, they get you to turn 2 and kill their Archdruid. I don't see it being massive. I think it's a lot more of a limited card. But maybe some Blood Moon deck or some Burn deck where they just really want to have something that they can bring in and maybe get a 2-for-1 out of. Kill your Archdruid, block something. But I'm not blown away by it.
You're basically going to have to be more interested in a 2/1 than the 3 damage that Searing Blaze deal. So I think it's a great card. There's a lot this card, for example, would be outrageous in standard. So I like seeing it here instead. But I think it's just a little underpowered.
Yeah, for sure. Our next one is Fury. This is the red of our incarnation. Fury is 3 red, double strike. When Fury enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. You can evoke it by exiling a red card from your hand, and it's a 3/3.
So yeah, this one is probably the least exciting of the ones we've talked about thus far. The problem is that 4 damage makes it hard to get 2-for-1s, reliably. So you can't really main deck it expecting to get all the values worth. I mean, I can see decks bringing it in against, really any Noble Hierarch deck. And that's where you can really start to get people with this. But even then, you're still 2-for-2, and you're just getting ahead tempo-wise. So I'm not really sure, if this guy's going to do anything.
I think it's sideboard at best. I mean, you can't dome the opponent. 4 damage isn't always enough to kill things. There's a lot of... I have this as my worst one of the elementals because there's so many decks where it doesn't do anything. And the red decks aren't typically going to cast it for 5. So even though it's a 3/3 double strike, that's irrelevant. So you're basically just pitching a mana to divide 4 damage amongst not your opponent. So I'm pretty unimpressed. I think you'll see it in sideboards, but you won't be happy to play it.
Yeah, I could see it being extremely good in the Burn Mirror. Getting a Goblin Guide and an Eidolon while taking 0 damage is completely outrageous, but that's a pretty narrow set of circumstances there.
Yeah, and you've 2-for-2'd, and they've at least hit you for 2, if not 4.
Right.
So you've thrown away 2 cards to throw away their 2 cards, but you've already taken the damage.
Exactly. Yeah. So card pretty unexciting. I wish they would have done better. Maybe it's really hard to let these things go to the face, but it's really hard when you limit what red wants to do.
I mean, would you have taken 3 damage or 2 damage divided if it could hit to the face?
Yeah, I think 3 is too much to the face, but 2. Let's do split 2, and they can go to anywhere.
Yeah.
I'd be down for that. I think that would be, and then make it a 4-mana 2/2 double strike. Something that the red decks could reasonably cast.
Yeah,
it would have been nice. But let's get to our next card. It's Glimpse of Tomorrow. Another one of these no casting cost suspend cards. Sorcery, suspend of 3. It costs red. And this one says shuffle all permanents you own into your library, then reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Put all non-aura permanent cards revealed this way out of the battlefield. Then do the same for aura cards. Then put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So build up a bunch of permanents and then shuffle them in. Do you see this being a build around?
I see it being a build around. I don't see it being like a tiered deck. But if you've never played against or resolved a warp world, you've never lived. And so like this card is sweet and it's really cool, but maybe some kind of like the Ponza decks put a lot of permanents in play. So like you could do something along those lines, but overall, I don't see it being absurd. I just think it's gonna be a really fun deck to take to like your local FNM.
Yeah, maybe this is what the Cascade decks need because people are really building them all around like slow creature permanents. So, I think you definitely need a way to cheat this to make it playable. And so, if you can figure out a way to have a bunch of permanents to play when you do that, maybe that's going to be a way to go. But a lot of the, suspend based decks we've seen are, Aspertol are, more spell based. So yeah. It'll be interesting to see if someone can find the right mix of freaking Emrakuls and Squirrel tokens to make this thing awesome.
Unfortunately, it's not polymorph, so however many permanents you shuffle is how many you reveal. Otherwise, you could like cheat into play with like Electro Dominance, the Footfalls to make the 2 Rhinos, and then play this to hit Emrakul, but it would have to be in the top 2 cards or whatever.
Yeah. It does shuffle all your permanents, though, so maybe...
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Ramp it, but then why would you just not cast something sweet if you ramp? So we'll see. Exactly. I mean, it's cool, so I hope it's
cool. Oh, yeah. So our next one is Obsidian Maw. 3 red. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each land your opponent controls that could produce colorless mana, flying. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on this one so that we're kind of keeping track of all the Tron hate again that we're seeing across the color pie. This one is not really scary on the draw. It's going to be slow. But, sometimes this card is going to be just stones. And I think, again, you mentioned E-Tron earlier. I think that's a matchup where this card's going to be better because the 4/4 flying body is going to have bigger impact.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I think you might see some like tier 2 red-white Blood Moon decks that they're like, oh, well, even if I don't get to cheat it, if I just play it for 5 and blow up a land, that's still kind of what we're wanting to do anyway. As like an alternate to if the Blood Moon's not play. But I definitely think it falls under the very narrow, hard to effectively justify playing it into an open format. Unless the format's really dominated by colorless lands.
Yeah, you're going to have... Yeah, that's definitely a sideboard card, and one of the worst ones. Blood Moon's gonna be better most of the time, but again, E-Tron, maybe one of the Ponza decks just gets to main deck this, and so they're just all rolled up against those decks, and it's just a reasonable card in their deck. I mean, pretty much every deck in the format you're gonna hit, the land. But now I get to talk about a card that you have tagged as overrated in our little file here, and that's a Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. Costs a red for a legendary monkey pirate, 2/1. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card, and it has dash of 1 and a red. You're going to have to defend your stance of this is not the best 1-drop besides Deathrite Shaman.
So I think it's really good, but the problem is it has to connect. And it is a very, very weak body. Unless you're dashing it, doesn't have haste. The treasure token is definitely the more appealing piece. In Modern, there's so many decks where the spells they have will not help you because they're very linear spells to accomplish certain aspects of the game. So you're normally not playing the card you get. You're just getting a treasure token, which alone is worth it. I think it's great. I think you're going to see play. I don't think it's insane. I don't see myself cutting Goblin Guides for it. I have Goblin Guide above it as far as what red wants to do with a 1-drop threat. I have Swift Spear above it for what red wants to do with a 1-drop threat. Deathrite Shaman's above it. So I think it's a really good 1-drop, but I do think it's overrated in the sense that all it takes is anything that can deal 1 damage to it, whether it's blocking or a spell, and it's really unimpressive because you're not even getting to represent the threat you turn and play it unless you're wasting the time dashing it, which the red decks... Mana usage, because their mana is so small, they have so few lands in their deck. Mana is such an important resource that they can't count on dashing it. So that's only going to come into play in late games when magically your opponents run out of resources too. So I'm more of a Card's great. Card will see play. Card is not insane. I'm not even sure if this card is better than the red one drop we saw earlier, the red Delver.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So I think it does do different things than Swiss Spear and Goblet Guide, which you mentioned earlier, and those are basically, hopefully hit you 3 times and you're dead. And yeah, this accrues card advantage, which is extremely good. And like you said, those decks are, very particular with their mana. So if you play a 1-drop gaining treasure tokens, then it's going to be really hard. The thing I see about this card is that it's going to make it even harder for, decks that were trying to keep up with red to keep up with a card like this. And this is a card I see that will steal you games on the draw. That's the problem with a lot of the red decks is once you get on the draw, the whole dynamic switch, your deck is a lot slower. And if you can stick this guy and hit your opponent with it, you're flipping the table. And then also, in any creature matchup, I mean, if you can hit with this thing, it's going to be a problem, man. The fact that it has built-in dash, so it literally has insurance for not drawing it on turn 1 is really good.
No, I think it's good. So whenever I'm like overrated, I definitely think it's good. And obviously, winning the dice roll, all red cards get better when you win the dice roll.
I'm saying this is insurance against the dice roll and against being on the draw.
Oh,
and that it will catch you up.
I think it gets so much worse if you lose the dice roll because what it is it is a card which the set has a couple of that's forcing Modern to have more interaction. You can't just not play interaction. You have to have bolts or fatal pushes or something or bodies. But the fact that you need to clear its path for it to do its work in the Modern format, I'm expecting that to not be as easy as it used to be. And so I think you're going to see a lot more times where you're going to walk around the tables, you're going to see red decks. And I think there's as many times you're going to see a Ragavan sitting there not doing anything as you're going to see it winning a game.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's very good for A1,
Yeah, for sure.
This thing can just win the game,
Oh yeah. No, I think it's good. I just don't think I don't even know if I would put it in top 5 1-drops because it's just a Savannah Lion if you can't do anything else with it. So unless you put in the work to protect it. So I think it's good, but I do think it's overrated in the sense that I'm not seeing it. I think it goes in the same decks Goblin Guide and Swiss Spear go into, and it's less efficient at winning those games for it.
Yeah.
So unless we're redesigning red, I don't think it's as good as the 1-drops that are currently.
I think it's easy to sidestep a red deck into something that can go a little bit longer. Because again, like you said, if it's going to be a lot of creature deck, it's going to be hard to get in the Goblin Guide hits, and things like that. And I just love this card. I think it's busted, and we don't have we can agree to disagree on how good it is, but I think we both agree that it's quite good. And I want to be hitting people with this.
Yeah, it's definitely a card I want to buy pretty early into the set because if they don't reprint it soon, in 6 months it's going to be a $40, $50 mythic because it's a mythic in this set.
Yeah, totally. So why don't you break us off with our last red card?
Our last red card is Strike It Rich, a very unassuming sorcery. It's 1 red, create a treasure token with flashback of 2 and a red.
Yeah, this is a card that's pretty innocuous, but when I look at it, I just start rubbing my hands together. I'm like, what kind of busted stuff can we do with it?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you have, I'm thinking more historic cards, but if you have Bergie and Steamkin, any of those things, it's just great. It's basically just kind of almost a ritual you can do at another point. It's a free spell. Unfortunately, unlike Crash Through, it doesn't replace itself, but it replaces the mana half of itself.
Right.
I definitely think you will see its play somewhere. I don't know if it'll be a 4 of or anything, but there's a lot of potential behind it.
Yeah, I like just slotting this in as a 1-of in, decks that can abuse it somehow, whether that be a Dreadhorde Arcanist, whether it be a Snapcaster Mage, whether it be a Berg or Steamkin, or whether that simply be, a prowess deck that can afford to put this in there, because, like you said, 0 mana trigger is good. And while you have plenty of free spells, you can already play Mutagenic Growth, Gut Shot. This does something different. So if you're more in the market for this than those things, then this card is super.
Oh, yeah.
So why don't you break us off with our first green card?
So our first green card, really weird situation to get this one into the format. We saw this one in Strixhaven. This is Abundant Harvest. It's a green sorcery. choose a land or non-land, reveal cards from the top of the library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind, put that card into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. I will say I hate when they say in a random order. Almost never makes a difference, and I hate shuffling cards to shove them onto the bottom of the deck. Irrelevant rant, but that's what it is.
Yeah. And you still have to. So if I did this for like 5 cards, and we had to shuffle my library, those 5 would still stay on the bottom, right? So you don't even gain that back. Like as opposed to you look at 5 and put them on the bottom in order. You don't shuffle those. Does that work the same way?
I mean, if you shuffle your deck after the spell resolves, then those cards are going to get shuffled anyway. So, like,
for example, like a judge call.
Oh yeah, no.
So it's like, why do I need to shuffle these? Why do I need to present 20 cards for my opponent to cut that are on the bottom? So yeah, I totally agree. As far as playability, I don't know. I think it's just too unreliable to be good. But I haven't been playing with it in historic. People apparently like
it. It's been a phenomenal in historic, just in generating value. I don't know if that's what modern wants. I think in modern format so fast, you want specific cards, whereas in historic, the Arcanist decks can survive off of just give me a non-land or give me a land, and whatever it gets will work towards my plan. So I think it's great, and I think it's a good addition. But it would be more in like a mid-range deck where they're just looking to make sure that they could turn this into another spell versus a land. But you might get ref with So it's
like like a Mizzet style of deck is like, sometimes I need it to be a land, sometimes I need it to be a spell. Yeah, I just don't. This evokes thoughts of like Amulet and Tron, but those decks already have cards that find specifically what they want. So yeah, I just don't see it. But who knows?
Oh yeah.
Our next card is Blessed Respite. Costs 1 and a green instant. Target player shuffles their graveyard into their library. Prevent all combat damage would be dealt this turn. Anything to say about that, Dredge guy?
I mean, I hate that card in general because of what it does, but I think it's a great card in just like your Nexus of Fate-esque decks. So I think it's going to get some play. I think adding as many cards that can mess with graveyards as possible is because graveyards we're learning is Magic is moving into graveyards are like some of the most broken spots of the game. So effect's great. Your next Fate Time Work decks are going to love this kind of effect.
Yeah, that's basically how I see it. One of sideboard card for Dredge or whatever. But yeah, it is cool. I do like seeing more graveyard hate. I think we reached a point where it can't really get any better. So I like getting it a little more versatile. Once you get in, we have Leyline, we have Rest in Peace, we have Torment Script. So you're not really gonna be able to improve on the quality. But I like something like this. A more specific use case where we get to see something cool instead of your normal thing.
Right. Yep. So our next one is Chatterfang Squirrel General. 2 and a green, legendary creature, Squirrel Warrior, 3/3. It has Forest Walk. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 green squirrel tokens are created instead. You can pay a black to sacrifice X squirrels. Target creature gets +X, -X until the end of turn.
Yeah, we're kicking off the squirrels here, hot off the presses, with probably the marquee one in this set. Of course, there's Tusk, already legal in Modern. And so when I think about squirrels, that's kind of the card that's in the back of my head. And I like this squirrel theme. This card is, on paper, like incredibly busted. And so, I would love to see squirrels in Modern. So yeah, I hope this thing can pull them out.
Yeah, I don't know the exact combo. I definitely have seen that there was like a 2 or 3 card combo that you can just like turn 4 kill somebody with this. But I can't remember exactly what it was. It was definitely abusing the token component. But I think it's great. I think it's a good card. Forest Walk's pretty solid text, and I think you're gonna be able to abuse that middle paragraph pretty well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we'll see Forest Walk later. Once we get into the land pile, you could lock that in that Forest Walk.
Oh yeah.
Let's go ahead and keep the squirrel train rolling with Chatterstorm. 1 and a green sorcery. Create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token with Storm. Is this gonna turn Storm on its head and make it green?
I could see it. I definitely could see it. The reason being, like, I think that the ability to make 1/1 squirrels for 2 mana versus paying 4 mana for an Empty the Warrens, I think has enough value. But I think what we're going to see instead is it's going to open up like a whole new take on that deck versus just Storm will now run green, because I don't think it's a unique enough effect to justify that.
Right.
So like your Burning Tree Emissary kind of thing is like you can get between the Herbalist out of one of the Innistrad sets that does Burning Tree effect. So now you can have 8 Burning Trees, and you could just try to do those with like, I want to get 3 squirrels off of it. And so you're just chaining a couple of those into each other, using the mana to then cast Shatterstorm, and then you're like making 3 2/2s and 4 1/1s on turn 2.
Yeah, and then that obviously sounds like a Bushwhacker deck to me as well. So
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that would be cool. I would love to see a Chatterstorm aggro deck. That is my cup of tea right there.
Oh yeah. So the next one we have you have is Chitter Spitter, 2 and a green for an artifact. The art is amazing. The name is amazing. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice a token. If you do, put an Acorn counter on Chitter Spitter. Squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each Acorn counter on Chitter Spitter, and it also is green to tap to make a 1/1 Squirrel token.
Yeah, I just love this card because if Squirrel tokens are going to be away, I mean, this card's insanely powerful. So this deck is going to need to find a way to stop your opponent from doing broken stuff, and then flood the board with your squirrels. But this probably is a sideboard option. But I mean, this thing's an army in a can. I love cards like this.
Yeah, it will give you resilience against interaction. I think if you can find a way to slow your opponents, or the format slows, then I'm back on board for this deck. But as it stands in the modern I'm used to, it's too slow for me to be super interested in.
Yeah, I like the flavor. I like that they're establishing squirrels, though, and I want to see some more support going forward.
Oh yeah,
and if squirrels is going to be a big go wide green token deck, I mean, Court of Calling's been waiting to have the right shell, and it's seen play before, and it's been pretty good before. But when that card is free, and you're getting Crater Host, that's what I'm talking about. So
oh yeah.
That's kind of where I hope squirrels are going, and I love to see squirrels. Let's wrap up the elemental incarnation cycle with Endurance. Costs 1 GG, 3/4 flash reach. So right off the bat, we see the best rate we've seen thus far. When it enters the battlefield, up to one target player puts all the cards from their graveyard on the bottom of their library in a random order, with of course evoke, exile a green card from your hand. So we see another graveyard hate. This one, I think it makes sense that it has the best rate because it has, the most narrow ability, if not just straight up the worst ability. What's your take on Endurance?
I think it is. I actually am pretty high on Endurance. So many decks in Modern really love their graveyard, and they really lean into their graveyard. I actually kind of have Endurance, and depending on the format, I could see Endurance being anywhere from the 4th best incarnation to the 2nd best incarnation. Behind Grief being number 1, and then it's a matter of whether or not the blue and white ones swap places. I think the text and the ability to actually cast it if you wanted to eventually, and the fact that it has flash, besides Grief, the Bant colors all have flash. The red one is just sitting there with double strike. So I think it's better than the red one. I think the red one's astronomically behind everything else. And then this one, I think, when you want this effect, it's phenomenal. I think the rate for the body is good enough for you to actually main deck this. So I could see some like heavy green creature-based decks main deck this, and occasionally, if they have to, just pitch a card to get Dredge, pitch a card to get Phoenix, Vine, Hollow One decks. And then if they don't need that effect, they're just flashing in a 3/4. So I think it's great. And the fact it has reach, there's a lot of like small flyers that occasionally pop up out of like spirit decks and things. So I actually have this one pretty high on my list as, depending on the format, up to being the 2nd best one.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like, again, it is going to, depend on the graveyard as far as main deck ability, but even then, I mean, a 3/4 flash reach for 3 is not the worst card. And what I really like about this is it gives kind of a definite answer for Coco decks as to what their best graveyard hates. Because this card is just on rate. This card is so much better than trying to Scooze people, trying to Loaming Shaman people, because you get the Coco hit with a good body on top of a force of crypt, like free hate card is really powerful. So that's where I see it. Also, when I was looking at this card, I thought that for a moment in time they are in play for Nick though. So maybe if there's some type of green devotion, this could be a player in their deck that lets them eschew all the sideboard hate for graveyards, and it gives them just a decent card to put in that you can channel out some extra green mana early in the game by evoking it.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
So sell me on Fey Offering, because I put a big no on that and you want to talk about it.
Yeah, so I think Fey Offering is an interesting card. I don't think it has a home in current Modern, but I think there's a lot of things like we've talked about, and I think I've said this phrase multiple times. There's a lot of these cards that are going to force decks to have interaction, or they're just coin flipping matches. So because of that aspect, if the format isn't insanely linear, or if there was a brief time where there was a Sultai Wilderness Reclamation kind of like control-ish mid-range deck, and with things like Torrential Gearhulk, Snapcaster Mage, Stormwing Entity, it's not hard to trigger Fey Offering, and getting a food, a clue, and a treasure token all off of it is insane. And so I'm a believer that 3 mana for an enchantment that all you have to do is cast a creature and a spell. It's not too hard of a thing to accomplish. You get the payoff of these 3 tokens, especially if you can get any other value off those tokens. Because the Wilderness Reclamation decks against burn decks, they can activate this ability once or twice, or if they have 2 of these in play and they activate it once, now they can gain 6 life off these food tokens and get 2 cards, and they've gotten 2 mana refunded. So I think the text box in there is so powerful that it won't take much for me to see this being like a 1 or a 2 of as a payoff card in a kind of a mid-range deck.
Gotcha. Yeah, it is a pretty powerful card. My only thing with it, and the reason I don't think it's going to see play, A, it's slow, B, the payoff is not proactive really, and C, if you're casting a creature and a spell reliably multiple turns in a row, you're probably winning. And so I just don't. It just seems like a win more to me. But we will see, or we have seen, or we skipped at least, a lot of things that reference these specific tokens of like making multiple tokens. So I would be interested to see, if there's a mid-range deck that goes that route of making these different tokens and, getting advantage that way. But as far as like I'm going to play this and just do it a couple times, I don't.
Yeah. Well, speaking about the payoff, you had a card, yes, that I had a no for seeing much Modern play.
Yeah, and this is a card I just want to talk about because I just saw it today when I was, skimming through again, and that's a Glimmer Baron. It's an oath for a single green, a 1/2, and the ability is sacrifice a token. Glimmer Baron gets +2/+2 until the turn. And yeah, I want to talk about it because on rate, that is extremely good. Normally we see that at Nantuko Husk levels. Sometimes we see it as a 2-drop 1/1 that sacrifices creatures again, but if this is the kind of thing you want, this thing is really good. So that's just why I wanted to mention it. If there's you can make a bunch of tokens, you're just looking for something to do with them. We've seen, we'll get to this cookbook card later that makes a bunch of tokens that don't necessarily always have a use. So maybe this is the payoff.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that kind of effect.
Now you're the lucky man that gets to talk about, one of the more exciting cards coming up.
Yeah, this is a card I've seen people be like, oh, it's printed demand. It's not going to be very much. This card's going to be super expensive, and it's going to stay super expensive. It's Ignoble Hierarch. It's 1 green for a 0/1 Goblin Shaman. It has Exalted, and it taps for either a black, red, or green mana. So it's Noble Hierarch, but for Jund.
Yeah, we're switching Noble Hierarch from a Bant human to a Jund Goblin. And, that's another tribe that really needed a quality 1-drop. And what else can you ask for in a 1-drop? Obviously, it's green, so you'll have to, switch some things up. But wow, I love this being added to Modern. I love, branching out the colors that a Noble Hierarch can produce. It's going to be in fair decks, and I love it.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that this card's going to be incredibly expensive, and if you're wanting one, if you're going to want to get one. As soon as it becomes a thing, snag it up. Like the price might dip a little bit early on, and it's going to be what Noble used to be.
Yeah, you see it being a $50, $60 card.
Potentially, yeah, because the set's print to demand, but the set's also very, very expensive. And we have Forgotten Realms, which is going to pull a lot of people's purchases in July. So like print to demand asterisk. There's not going to be much of a window for people to demand it. So I don't expect a lot of these prices. They're really high now. I expect like a week or two after the set releases them to dip a little bit. And then by August, all these prices are going to start elasticing back to the rates that they were, the one that you're seeing them right now.
Yeah, and don't forget, we're still not back to paper tournaments, big paper events where that does drive sales of paper. People need play sets of these kind of things, especially a set like this that is focused, or I wouldn't say focused, but it definitely impacts the competitive player tournament.
Yeah.
Will.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love to see it. I'm all about it. I have who knows how many unfinished files in my notes pad on my phone that start with like Four Noble Hierarch and then whatever else you want to do. So there'll be a lot of brewing with the Ignoble Hierarch, and yeah, I love it. I love seeing stacking of powerful things that you can do, choose directions with.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I love it. So you got to do that. I get to talk about a big sick ass dinosaur, so at least I don't have to feel bad. Or am I skipping it? Where's the?
No, you're skipping one right here.
I scrolled. Okay, we're actually going to talk about Sanctum Weaver, which is a 1 and a green for a enchantment creature dryad. 0/2 taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments. I really think they maybe could have made this a 1-drop and really pushed the idea of enchantress.
I agree. I think I almost think that they went a little safe on it, but also the effect is kind of insane. So I think they went a little safe, but I would much rather have gone a little bit safer on it, because the moment this card snowballs, you're never catching back up to it.
Yeah, because it's going to allow you to cast more enchantments, which just adds more and more. So I mean, if Enchantress is good, I think this will be part of it, and I don't think it will be good because this card's not good. That's where I'm at with it.
You don't think this card's good enough?
No, I think it's too slow. You look at Modern, and if you look at 2-mana Dork, you look at Devoted Druid, which, if you're an opponent and they play Devoted Druid, you're thinking, if I don't kill this, I'm dead, right? Like, I'm dead now. And this card does not evoke that to me. But, I could be proven wrong, and maybe, that deck, it is an enchantment, so maybe if we get into things like Sterling Grove to protect it, that'll be the route.
Yeah, I think if the enchantment deck's a deck, this is going to be one of the primary reasons, because we have a number of things that draw when enchantments come into play. So you have all of those as targets, and you have this mana dork as a target. So I think we're overwhelming the amount of interaction you see out of decks, and so it's just a matter of whether or not they can slow other linear decks down enough. Which, I mean, keep in mind, the enchantment deck is probably green-white, and they want to run things like Rule of Law.
Yeah, who knows? They'll probably be a suspension field. I always can remember if it was suppression or suspension. No, it is suppression field. Things like that. Yeah, hate bear enchantment. So maybe but on surface level, I think no. But we'll see.
Oh yeah.
So take me. So our next one we have Godzilla that I was hoping.
Oh yeah, this one's sweet. This is Thrasta Tempest Roar. And that is 10 green for a 7/7 legendary dinosaur. This spell costs 3 less to cast for each other spell you cast this turn, so kind of semi-stormish. Trample, haste, and has the unique text of it tramples over planeswalkers. So if you hit a planeswalker, any excess damage that would be assigned to the planeswalker gets dealt to the player. And then it has hexproof as long as it enters the battlefield this turn. So you kind of get that one free swing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you're going to turn this thing on, but it is super sweet. I love the keyword trample over planeswalkers. I want to see that everywhere. Yeah, I mean, big, scary. The art is sick. Basically, a dinosaur with Godzilla, lightning come off in it. So I love dinosaurs coming in, but I just don't know how you're going to make this thing work.
I think it's just those Bushwhacker-esque decks, right? So we're just going to go turn 1, play a 1-drop, maybe a Ragavan, a Goblin Guide, whatever. Turn 2, you play a fetch land, you play some Burning Trees, some Manamorphoses, some of those hidden herbalists that make mana, so you're getting 2 mana off of it, and then you're just attacking with a 7/7 on turn 2.
Yeah, my only thing is that it requires so much. You've got to play 3 spells before this costs 3. So you're going to wait till turn 3 at least? And, that's still fast for...
Yeah. But, I mean, those decks are really pretty dependent on playing 3 or 4 spells on turn 2 or turn 3. Like that's the only way those decks exist. They're a low glass cannon, but I don't know. I don't know if it's going to like take over a tournament table. But I think that's a deck that we're all going to go to GPs and FNMs, and we're going to lose to that person, and we're going to say, well, that deck is so glass cannon, my opponent win percentage is going to suffer for it.
Yeah, and somebody will play this thing on turn 2. So
yep.
That will be a bad day. All right, so I get to talk about Timeless Witness for 2 GG 2/1 Human Shaman. When it enters the battlefield, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. But it also has Eternalize, 5G. So basically, Witness costs one more, has Eternalize. I think it's sweet, but I think it's probably too slow for Modern.
I think it's sweet. I think it is a little slow for Modern. I think it is interesting that we have like another costed version of Ewit to kind of do birthing pods if that ever gets unbanned, Prime Sequel Zagana, those kinds of things. I think it's just another version of Ewit for Commander players. So I don't think it's going to replace Ewit, but I also wouldn't be surprised if there's some cards in the future that care about having a 3-mana Ewit and a 4-mana Ewit.
Yeah, or something, that can get to that Eternalized, maybe the value. I see this as what I'm going to be first picking draft.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Take me through a creature that we can hit off Collected Company.
So a card we can hit off Collected Company is 2 and a green Tireless Provisioner. Landfall, when a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can either create a food token or a treasure token, and it's a 3/2.
Yeah, so I love Tireless Tracker, and this card, gives you the choice of 2 tokens. So I think it's pretty interesting, and we're getting even more cards that can fit into these, landfall style Coco decks that have popped up here and there. It's unfortunate that it's yet another 3-drop in which they have so many to choose from, but I like this one as like a hedge against burn or control, or it just can generate a lot of value.
Yeah, like the Sultai Wilderness Reclamation decks I was talking about earlier, I would play this in there potentially, depending on what I need. Not being a clue, so it's not generating card advantage, is a little bit of a bummer, but the treasure tokens are nice, and then the food would be far less often you select that one. It is also an elf, so it is a relevant creature type, but I definitely like the design element for sure.
Yeah, and it's just one of those cards that, okay, this card's pretty good at see play. We'll slot it in.
Yeah, and, I just don't know how often I'll see it over Tracker.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is, the Tracker has the best token. So, It is what it is. And I'll wrap us up with our last green card, and that's Verdant Command. It's an instant for 1 and a green, and it lets you choose 2 of the following. Target player creates 2 tapped 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens. Counter target loyalty ability of a planeswalker. Exile target card from a graveyard, and target player gains 3 life. Do you think enough of these modes are relevant for this card to be a player?
Yeah, I actually have this card is just kind of one of my sleepers in the set as potentially one of the best cards in the set for what it does. It's not going to crush the format, but super flexible card with great list of choices, 2 choices for 2 mana. I think countering a Planeswalker's ability will come into play semi-often. Making 2 1/1s for 2 manas at instant speed. We've seen that out of white. It's been a fine ability. Gaining life against mono red decks, you make 2 1/1s, block their Eidolon of the Rebel. You took 2 damage, but then you gain 3 life. Or be able to eat the reanimation target out of the graveyard. So I think it does enough against things that historically are powerful and modern for such a cheap amount of mana that I think you're going to see this in tons of sideboards.
Yeah, so you cannot block, like you said, because they're tapped. But
yes.
I think I agree with you on every other point, because I look at this and it reminds me kind of like Kaya's Guile, where they're all like, pretty medium. But we see so much play because, one of the modes is always relevant. And so, these modes are like pretty small, but they're pretty wide. And I think that, they will be relevant more often than not. To me, it's going to be a matter of what is your deck doing with these squirrel tokens to make this card playable. And so, if we get a squirrel deck, this card will probably feature prominently in it. Going wide with green tokens and, maybe porting out some Creator Hoofs.
Yeah, I think if you don't have a lot of dredge in the format, if the graveyard decks are specific reanimation decks, then you see this because I'm looking at it as you're playing it for bullets 2 and 3, the counter a Planeswalker ability and the exile card from a graveyard, and then you're just choosing between bullet 1 and 4 for what the best splashed extra effect is.
Yeah, and time will just tell. It will come and go as those modes. The power of those modes skills. But yeah, I think if squirrels is a thing, this card will be part of it because it is so flexible. You can play it on 2 just to get your squirrels going. You can hold it up later to make double squirrels and then get whichever mode you need. So very interesting card.
Oh yeah.
And so why don't you kick us off with our first gold card, which is actually a card I wanted to take about. So why don't you throw me the fastball so I can get home?
So this one, because this means you have to pronounce the next one, is Artbound Shikari, 1 red white, first strike 0/0. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other artifact creature you control, and it has modular 2, and it's a cat soldier.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this because if Affinity were to go a direction that is red-white, you think about Bomat Courier, you think about the white artifact creatures we've seen thus far, you think about Galvanic Bastard, Shrapnel Blast. This card is super good in those kind of decks because we all know that if you let your opponent untap with a Steel Overseer, you are dead. And so this does that. It comes in with the payoff, and it also has a payoff when it dies. And so I just think this card is super good. It spreads so many counters that, I would love, curving, Signal plus Ornithopter into Ravager into this is like that. That's a lot of juice you're getting out of a 3-drop. And so
Yeah,
he's taking that Master of Ethereum, that Steel Overseer role, and just making it, more of a guaranteed thing is always a good way to go.
Yeah. I think my only hesitation with it is having played tons of Affinity, your threats really need to be in that 2 mana range, especially with Opal being gone. You don't have the luxury of playing a 3-drop on turn 2 very easily at all, especially not with like other bodies to get value off of it. And a lot of the artifact hate we see in the format was printed into the format when Affinity was lightning fast because of Opal. So my concern is that it is a bit slow for what I want to be doing with Affinity because I know my opponents are going to have artifact hate, so I need to push through. That being said, it does play well around Stony Silence. So, I mean, I don't think it's bad. I could see playing 1 or 2 of it in an Affinity deck, but having to have 2 colors of mana whenever you play a lot of colorless artifact lands, having to have 2 colors and it not coming to pull, and it being a 3-drop make me a little more hesitant.
Yeah. I just see Affinity as a deck that's going to have to battle more because of what you said, and that speaks to this getting the value right away, and it has modular, so there's just, to me, I look at this as this thing has a lot of juice it can squeeze out. It's not, you're blistering fast, but again, with more artifact lands, beautiful, and maybe you have to go heavier on Springleaf Drums and Paradise Mantle to make Affinity even playable again, so who even knows if that's going to be a thing, but I definitely see this as a card that can make Affinity better, just because this thing has so much, it just does so much.
Well, I hope you're right.
This thing is going to be worth 5, 6, a lot.
Yeah.
All right, especially when you sack it, you get 3 counters to the Ravager. I'm just saying, it ain't no cranial plating, but I see some use. All right. And now we will have recorded on audio for all of time me attempting to pronounce this here gold card, and I am completely sober, and I am going to try my best. So here we go. I got to read. I'm just going to try to sound it out. Asmarano Mardikadisinaculakadar.
Close. I'll give you like an 80%.
Asmarano Mardikadis. It's just so hard. So close. I need to hear someone say it first, and then it'll be good. So you want to try?
No. I think you nailed it. I think you got it. You got it.
Well,
right.
Anyway, this legendary human wizard 3/3. It does not have a casting cost because the text is completely its name. As long as you've discarded a card this turn, you may pay a Rakdos to cast a spell, so red or black. When Asmarano enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a card named the Underworld Cookbook, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. Sacrifice 2 foods, target creature deals 6 damage to itself. Now, we'll pause here. We should skip ahead to the Underworld Cookbook because it does affect the quality of this card. Is that right?
I think it does. I don't know if it's I wouldn't be
Because
surprised
if
eventually
it
to
said
see it
search the
not.
library for Black Lotus, that'd be a whole nother deal. So the Underworld
Right.
Cookbook is an artifact in this set. It costs a single mana. You tap to discard a card and create a food, and you pay for tap and sack it to return target creature from your graveyard. So essentially, like a little food engine there. And these are really the tag team I've seen already popping up in Modern.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
The Hollow One decks. Yeah.
this card is just take me
It's
through. How did they even print this card?
it's interesting. And I honestly, when I first saw the spoiler, I was like, "Oh, this is pretty good." I don't think it's to see a ton of play because I didn't think about like what the food cookbook would do for like Hollow One. I honestly, originally when I first saw, it, I was like, the food cookbook is so conditional. Can it just put the cookbook into play? Like, don't put it to my hand. Just let it go straight into play. That being said, I think it's insane as is. I think the card is great, and I think the cookbook only is good because people are looking at it from a feasting Troll King perspective. That's the card coming out.
The initial decks did not have Feasting Troll King, and I was like, if this deck can figure out a way to take advantage of the food, it will be great. And so people have done that, and so I'm seeing this as a deck that's something's going to get banned out of the deck. Maybe it's just looking outrageously powerful to me. It's a graveyard deck that does not really care if you have graveyard hate. Big, fast guys early. We've seen Hogak break it. We saw Bridgevine before that. We've seen Dredge have multiple bannings across Modern. So, the deck lists I've seen already are looking problematic to me.
Yeah. I mean, they're playing Street Wraith, which to me, anytime I can cheat and not play 60 cards, I'm on board.
Yeah. Anytime
and
a
that's
Street Wraith shows up, there's something.
for sure. And so, like, I think we have, between Hollow One, we have all the all-stars of all these decks, and they haven't always fit in the same deck together. And it seems like this is kind of helping pull all that together. So I think it's very interesting. I think it's unassuming. I think if you just showed someone this card, they'd be like, "Oh, that's interesting. It's pretty good." But the moment you see the engine rolling, you're like, "Oh, I think everybody undervalues it until they see it cast the first time."
Yeah, totally. And I think once you realize that the cookbook is the engine for the deck, and that with the Troll King and with everything, with Hollow One, Vengevine, the Root Wallow we talked about earlier, all those things combined, it's just such a huge mass of everything that works together.
Yeah. So do you think they're going to ban the cow? That's the question.
Yeah, definitely the cow is going to get banned. No, I mean, probably Vengevine or Hollow One would be my guess, but who knows? Who knows if anything gets banned? I just hope I get to play this deck before things get banned. Let me get some paper magic. Let me get out a cookbook because that's my style all day.
Hey, this is a standing offer. I refired up my mana traders, so I'm going to be testing for the Hunter Burton, and I'm going to be jamming that deck like for the next 2 weeks.
Absolutely. It's the kind of deck that you like to just sit in Goldfish because the nut draws are so hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so our next first Planeswalker.
And they printed some pretty good Planeswalkers straight into Modern. So we have Dakin the Shadow Slayer. They had to do this one right because of the name of the card. So it's white, blue, black, so just one of each Esper color. 0 loyalty. Dakin the Shadow Slayer enters the battlefield with a number of loyalty counters on him equal to the number of lands you control. +1, Surveil 2. -3, exile target creature. -6, put an artifact card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, this card is extremely powerful, and there's a lot of things I really like about Planeswalker. As far as, play-wise, I love that it scales in your hand or on the battlefield the same, which is +1. If you're hitting your land drops every turn, this essentially is gaining a loyalty every turn. Or you could play it early and then start the surveilling. So I really like that it kind of has a constant, level up of the power level.
Oh, yeah.
And I like that the first two abilities aren't too powerful. The ultimate's not even too powerful. But, I like that it's something you can hold up later. Maybe a turn 6 you play it, you get a Gear Hulk with counter up, or you play a second one, get another Gear Hulk. Or there's just a lot of really cool things you can do with this.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's going to be built around, but I think it's going to be insane potential for whatever deck does successfully build it. But I think it's going to be very precise on how to make it work.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you definitely are going to need to be able to take advantage of the ultimate like quite well for this card to be good. But in those shells where this is the card you're built around, or you're built to, for this card to be very good, that the failsafe of 3 mana exile creatures is really nice floor to have on a card. So I like this. I see it showing up in Esper control decks, whether that be in limited numbers or a more focus. I could see it going either way or both ways, really. Having in Magic is a time in now where you can play, the same archetype but be 20, 30 cards apart, and you're just taking a slight different focus. And I think Dakin will be like an avenue you choose to take in Esper Shell.
Sure. Oh yeah.
So I love it, and I love seeing this in Modern. I think this card would be too good in Standard, assuming the Ultimate could put anything of reasonable power into play. So I love seeing it in Modern, and I love it being pushed, but in an interesting and unique way, where this isn't just going to go everywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't follow the traditional design flow as much.
Yeah, and now I get to talk about one of the most exciting cards to me in the set, and that's going to be General Ferris Rockerich. Okay, that one's hard to say too. A 1 red-white for a 3/1 legendary human soldier, hexproof and monocolored. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. That's a lot of text on that game.
Yeah, I missed that it had hexproof and monocolored at first. And so at first I was like, well, it's a 3-mana 3/1. It's just going to die before it does anything. A lot of the spot removal in Modern is monocolored. There's very few like Drown in the Locks floating around. So it's a 3-mana 3/1 that's largely untouchable. And I think you're going to see a lot of like decks with Manamorphoses and Shardless Agents and Bloodbraid Elves that are just trying to generate a couple 4/4s on turn 4 and just hope that that's enough to take over the game.
Yeah, those are most of the decks I've seen. Yeah, it's like Noble Hierarch, this guy, Shardless, Bloodbraid, other gold value cards. When I read this, the direction I wanted to take it in again was Bushwhackers, because I want to kill you. And this thing's going off. Let's get this game over with. So I think of Burning Tree Emissary, Manamorphose, Bushwhackers, but the problem is that's where like the really good cards you want to play in. The gold 1-drops are well below average in Modern, and that's true I think for the 2-drops as well. So it might be interesting to see, is this deck going to have to go, how many colors, how hard are we going to have to try to abuse this card to make it a Modern standout? Because I do think this is a build-around card that will make an impact in Modern. I think it is that.
No, for sure. I agree entirely. I think it's going to definitely be a card everybody's going to lose to at least a couple times.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so powerful. Pro monocolored, that's Path Bolt and Push, the 3 most played removal spells in Modern. So this thing's going to be hard to deal with. Yeah, this is the kind of card I want to be following this up with, a Manus Rider and getting the game over.
Sure.
So yeah, you get to take us through our second and last Planeswalker again. This one a little bit different.
Well, this is second to last. We're gonna have one more.
There is another. You're right. My mistake.
Yeah. So we have Greyadrone Dihada, which is 1 blue, black, red. 4 loyalty, protection from permanents with corruption counters on them. +1, each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life, and you put a corruption counter on up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. -3, gain control of target creature or planeswalker until the end of turn, untap it, and put a corruption counter on it against haste until the end of turn. -7, gain control of each permanent with a corruption counter on it.
I just think not good enough for Modern.
I think probably not good enough for Modern because the more controlling Grixis decks just haven't been viable or successful. But if one of those decks can even get close to breaking out, this thing protects itself with its +1, protects itself with its -3, and wins the game with the -7. So I think it's actually fairly close because it gets to 7 so quickly also. But I think it's going to be really dependent on, can you get a Grixis deck that's more control-driven to actually keep up with the other stuff people are doing?
Yeah, I look at this and I see a 4-mana Planeswalker that has blue in the cost, and I think, are you competing with Jason Mind Sculptor? And to me, the answer is, and it's not.
I think you could see it mix in with some Jason Mind Sculptor decks because it protects itself so much better than Jason Mind Sculptor. And I think the fact that you're gaining life off of its +1 So like I could see you having like 2 Jaces and 1 of this, because when it does resolve, like your aggro opponents, after you've swept the board and then you play this, you can slowly start giving yourself another cushion.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could show up, but I just think
Yeah.
And that's going to take us to our last Planeswalker I spoke earlier. And this is one I wanted to talk about just because of how interesting. A Grist the Hunger Tide, 1 black-green, 3 loyalty Planeswalker. As long as Grist the Hunger Tide is not on the battlefield, it's a 1/1 insect creature in addition to the type. +1, create a 1/1 black-green insect token, then mill a card. If an insect card was milled to play, put a loyalty counter on Grist process. -2, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy target Planeswalker. And -5, opponent loses life number of creature cards in your graveyard. I just think it's a really cool card design, and it can be powerful to have a Planeswalker that you can unearth or do other fun animator, like have a different angle.
Yeah, I think it's extra interesting because of like it's kind of a Planeswalker that can be a commander. So I think it's kind of cool in that perspective. And I think the text, everything it does is interesting. I just think it's all too slow and fair for Modern.
Yeah, totally. I just think it was hard to look at. That it's really cool. People hate on Dryad Arbor because of like the awkwardness of what is this and all that thing. But I think it's cool to have a card like that where it fills these really niche roles and it can do cool things that normally you would be able to do. But
yeah.
Really. And before we get to your next card, I did want to mention Moderation. It's a card we did not have on our list, but you did mention it earlier, so I just touch on it.
Yeah, I actually just changed it because I've come around on it.
It's an enchantment for 1 white and a blue. You cannot cast more than 1 spell each turn. Whenever you cast a spell, draw a card. So an engine card to build around. How is this going to work?
Yeah, I think I think Sam Black had an article about it, and I was talking to somebody earlier with Wizards that like they were talking about the fact that they had debated it at 2. They said it was too good. It would go into too many decks at 2 mana. So they had to put it at 3. But I think this is the kind of card you want if you're going to play a more traditional control deck where you're playing these elementals, where you're playing counterspells, where you're playing sweepers, where those decks are only playing 1 spell a turn anyway. The only thing you really lose is your Snapcaster Mage is no longer a card you can really run. But I think you can justify that if you can make this card fire off enough to give you enough cards that you might be able to justify not running Snapcaster, just running this Moderation and being like a creatureless control deck.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it would be interesting to see how that would have to be built, but I could definitely. And it would have to be. Yeah, it might be a Planeswalker-less deck as well, because it's going to be a lot harder to protect them when you can't have counterspell backup for your own things, and you can't. Yeah, multiple. You can't do things with counter backup, like I just said. So that's another interesting take on this. It can also be a sideboard card. Someone brings it in. Okay, this matchup is slow. I bring it in. I get all the value I want, and that's that.
Yeah. No, I think it will take a very specific build to do it for sure.
Yeah. All right, so that we touched on that. Now take us get us back on our list there.
All right. So our next card we have is Priest of Fellrights. It's a white-black human warlock 2/2. You can tap it, pay 3 life, and sacrifice it to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate it only as a sorcery, and it unearths for 5.
Yeah, so a reanimator creature. It is pretty nerfed. I don't think the pay 3 life was necessary. Maybe because of the unearth, that's why they added it. They didn't want to give you too many, abusable ways to reanimate. But another piece to add to the reanimator pile. And unfortunately, all the pieces are pretty nerfed. So I think they're going to need something unfair to make it.
Yeah. I'm looking at this one kind of as a gold in that general deck or in a humans deck that you're really kind of just getting... You're playing a 2/2 gold human that you can use to bring back like a Thalia's Lieutenant or do whatever you're wanting to do, a Blood Braid Elf, which, wouldn't cascade, but you're just bringing back something. But a 2-mana reanimation spell, it's always worth looking at, but and it doesn't have any additional card costs like sacking another creature, but it also has to survive through upkeep. So I think the fact that it has to survive through upkeep, or you have to pay the 5 mana to unearth it, I don't want a 5 mana Rise from the Grave. So I'm less interested in that aspect.
Right. It does represent a 2-for-1 in those, human or gold deck scenarios. So, again, maybe a sideboard card, maybe a card you play one or two of. Maybe, I don't know, somewhere else, Niv Mizzet changes what it does. It does reanimate Niv Mizzet, and it does get hit off Niv Mizzet. So maybe that could be a new direction for them.
Yeah. Hey, Sam, are you free at all tomorrow? Because I just realized it's getting pretty late and I have to take Mary to the airport pretty early.
No, I work tomorrow.
Okay.
Want to just speed through this?
Yeah, let's speed through it. Try to see if we can knock out the last little bit, or else I might be able to get back on a little bit later. But I want to make sure I've got all of our stuff set up.
Okay. I mean, I'll be up all night too, so if you just want to reconvene later, that works.
Yeah, let's try to push through a couple more, and then we'll see how long that takes.
Let me stop the recording here so we don't lose 3 hours. How about
that? Yeah, let's do that.
All right, and so our next card is going to be Ragnos Headliner, black and a red for a 3/3 devil, has haste, and it has the echo cost of discard a card. I mean, high rate on 3/3 haste for 2, but you do have the downside of discard a card. I think people will be able to abuse that enough to make the thing player.
Yeah, I think this will see some play in red-black aggro decks. There's enough payoffs for discard, enough madness effects, enough stuff that you want in the graveyard that I don't actually see echo discard a card as a drawback. I almost see it as like you want to have to pay that echo as many times as possible. So I think you're going to see this card getting played a lot in any kind of, if we can get a red-black aggro deck together, because it beats so fast and it just activates all these other features.
Yeah, it is going to be, we've talked at length already about this cookbook, Hollow One Vengevine decks, and this is just another piece of that puzzle. Is it good enough now? I don't know. I think it's really good. I think it will probably maybe be one of those cards where if they do start banning things, this will work its way in. And then this, because this thing is a pretty heavy hitter. So if you're replacing, let's say, Vengevines with this, and you have to slightly shift to, having something else to discard or more discard, then this card's great.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So our next one is one that you have on the list, I'm guessing, because of the creature type. We have Ravenous Squirrel. It's a green-black hybrid, 1/1 squirrel. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact or creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Ravenous Squirrel. And you pay 1 black-green to sacrifice an artifact or creature and gain 1 life and draw 1 card.
Yeah, I totally put on here because it was a squirrel. I wanted to touch on all the squirrels just so we could get, it's a new tribe really that it's getting support in Modern. And so I think it's important to look at all the pieces, what are they doing, and which of these is one to look at. And I think this is one of the ones I look at and go, this is a build around. We look at things earlier that sacrifice creatures, and when you think about making a lot of tokens, sacrificing them is one way to abuse them. And so yeah, this is something I can see. You play it early, you get some tokens, and then you play a sacrifice outlet, and all of a sudden this is, a Ravager level threat.
Yeah. No, I definitely could see it getting out of hand pretty quick, and I think the creature type's really important to track. I just don't know how much. If there is a squirrel deck, we just don't have a lot of one-drop squirrels, so I think that's its biggest argument.
Exactly. And also, the built-in sacrifice artifact, gain a life, draw a card, that's one of those things that's just super powerful to have in a game that bogs down, or both players mulligan a lot, and you're kind of both, fiddle farting around, and it grows itself too. So it just does a lot for a one drop in, and it also speaks to the theme very well. So I think if squirrels are going to be playable, I think this card will probably be in the mix.
Oh yeah.
So take us through. We got another Enchantress card coming up, and this is Sithis Harvest's Hand. It's a green and a white for a legendary nymph, 1/2. When you cast an enchantment spell, gain a life and draw a card.
I think it's great. I mean, if this deck exists, this is its most important card. You're gaining life and drawing cards. It's a 2-mana Enchantress effect versus the 3-mana enchantment we saw in green earlier. It is legendary, so you can't stack them, but I mean, this is exactly what these decks are looking for.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if this will be the engine that makes the deck playable. It just gives you so much time against any aggro decks. Obviously, the gas is there, and that's how the deck's going to work. And also, multiple copies are still green-white cycle gain life draw card. So it's not like you draw multiples and you're stuck twiddling your thumbs. So I think it'll come down to, are the either protection pieces or prison pieces good enough to make the deck viable?
For sure.
But this is definitely, the piece de resistance as far as that's going to go for them in Modern.
Oh, yeah. And then we have another one, which is going to kind of bring back another old deck, Territorial Kavu, which is a red and a green Kavu. Its power and toughness are star. Domain. Territorial Kavu's power and toughness are equal to the number of basic land types among lands you control. Whenever it attacks, you can either discard a card, if you do, draw a card, or you can exile up to one target card from a graveyard.
Yeah, I mean, this card is on the power level, if not better than Tarmogoyf. And that's a card that was the best creature in Magic for, 5 years maybe? So, yeah, this card's extremely powerful. When you speak of Zoo, the problem with Zoo in Modern is that it got to the point where, Wild Nacatl and Tarmogoyf weren't that big anymore. And now when you get into this card that's going to be, hopefully, a 5/5 on turn 2 or 3, it's got lets you discard cards and draw cards. It's going to be the main trigger that you activate. And, I mean, what else can you staple onto a 2-drop?
Yeah, as a 2-drop, I'm impressed. I thought it was going to be 3. I think we're going to see a Domain Zoo deck that's going to be very aggressive. And I think this is going to be their premier 2-drop.
Yes, I agree. And I think this is going to help with the General Ferris we saw earlier, giving him a buddy, right in the same color wedge of Naya, of something that just wants to beat down. I love it. I'd like to find a way to get the same trample that's, profitable. But, once we get into artifacts, we're going to see a really nice card that wants to talk about Domain Zoo. So we could talk more about that archetype when we get there. And that is actually going to be our last gold card. We're going to run that right into artifacts. And the first one we're going to talk about is an interesting little card called Brainstone. Costs a single colorless for the artifact, and you pay 2 and sack it to basically cast Brainstorm. Draw 3, and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library. Why did you have this card tagged as something you want to talk about?
So I like this one. The Urza decks are looking for 1 mana and 0 mana artifacts, and most of the ones they end up running are typically kind of like subpar. They don't do much. We just lost the Astrolabe and things like that. So you're looking for these enablers and cheap artifacts for the Urza kind of style decks. And so for that reason, you have a 1 mana artifact that activates those abilities a little bit better. And then you have the outlet to help you dig into something you need. And we are a fetch land format. So it allows you also have, if you're running 4 Brainstones to make Urza better, then you also have the ability to run some silver bullets for certain prevalent decks in the metagame that if you're not playing that matchup, you just Brainstone, put it on top and crack a fetch land to shuffle, and you keep on going about your day. So I think it's just the flexibility is massive.
Yeah, I think I only really see it in those artifact decks, whether it be Urza, and, the Urza decks now are constantly evolving from, are they a prison? Are they a Thought Boundary deck? Are they blue? Are they blue-red? And so, yeah, I can see this certainly fitting into that going forward. And it is a nice one to have, just sit on the board for a while. And then later on, once you got your Urza down, you untap with the Urza, you got all your blue going, then you start, taking advantage of this. And it's a nice card you can use with Luris. It's a nice card you can use with Emery. So I think it will find its niche places to be played. And I think it's a good place to store something like a Brainstorm effect is in this artifact that you need to kind of commit to make it.
Yeah, it's not, in no way, shape, or form is it something I'm worried about being broken. There's also occasionally decks where you don't want something in your hand, like you're going to polymorph into an Emrakul.
Yeah. Totally.
And we haven't really had a good way to put those cards back in the deck.
Yeah, that is a good point. A lot of times in the past, it's been Is It Charm, it's been Click Myself, that kind of thing. So that is a nice addition to those kind of things. And those are the kind of decks that generally need some stuff to do early, and this will fit in right there with those.
Oh, for sure. So our next one we have is a vehicle. This is Dermotaxi. It's a 2 mana 0/0 vehicle. It has imprint. When it enters the battlefield, you can exile a creature card from a graveyard, so it can be any graveyard. You can tap 2 untapped creatures you control until the end of turn. It becomes a copy of the imprinted card, except it's a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types. So you basically just imprint whatever the fattest thing in a graveyard is, tap 2 Stitcher suppliers that fueled it to begin with, and rumble with that black creature we saw earlier that makes them sacrifice a thing and discard a card and lose life, and you get to gain life and draw a card. So, kind of curious about that one.
Yeah, I think it's asking a little too much, but I think it's interesting, and I think that it could be a cool way to maybe help your enemy. Maybe they have to be, have a little bit of this lower stuff, and then work their way into, this can work with Grizzlebrand. So if that's the direction you need to go, instead of the non-legendaries, then maybe Dermotex can do sweet Grizzlebrand impression.
Sure.
Our next card, I think, will make a huge impact on Modern. Probably one of the cards from the set I think will make the biggest impact on Modern, and that is Cauldron Complete. It is an equipment, a legendary equipment for 7 mana. It has Living Weapon, it has Indestructible, and it has Equipped Creature gets +5/+5, has First Strike, Trample, Indestructible, Haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, exile that. And it has an equip cost of 7. So yeah, I look forward to paying 7 mana for this, and then paying 7 mana to equip it again after my living creatures died. Is that what's going to happen?
Not ever. Now, I'm interested in this one because I've seen so many Snowblade decks, because obviously Stoneforge Mystic's my first go-to. And I've seen a lot of these Stoneforge Mystic decks people have been brewing where they've been leaving this out because the liability of Stoneforge dying, you're never casting this for 7 very efficiently. So it could be that the liability of pulling it and not being able to activate Stoneforge is too high, but the effect on it is just insane. I think it could merit having as a one of that you are. Maybe it's out of the board, but like when this thing resolves, the game is just over. Unless they've got you really close to dead to rights, this thing will close the game so fast that I just don't see a ton of ways for your opponents to get around to resolved Caldera Complete.
Yeah, I think if people haven't come around to just playing this and being sad when you draw it, they will. Because that's the whole point, or the whole price, I should say, of Stoneforge Mystic, is that you get to play this incredibly powerful card, but the counterbalance to that is you have to draw a Batterskull. You have to draw Sword of Feast and Famine every so often, and when you're playing, those are pretty much all cards you never want to draw. And so adding one I want to draw less often, but it's even better when I go search it out. That's what I'm signed up for when I Stoneforge Mystic. And, this thing just provides such a better clock than Batterskull when the thing you need to do is find the big threat and close the game out, as opposed to grind out value with one of the swords or one of the Batterskulls.
Yeah, for sure.
It is so good at what it does. I think this thing is nasty. I think this is going to be what is going to make a certain creature deck the king amongst other creature decks is going to be access.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it's going to be seeing play. I'm on the camp that if I'm playing a Stoneforge Mystic deck in the first few weeks, I'm testing this one in it.
I'm playing it, yeah, and maybe even this could even see play in something like Eldrazi Tron. It just is incredibly powerful because the weapon itself and the creature's indestructible. So.
For sure. The fact it doesn't have lifelink to battle you back if you've been taking hits is its biggest drawback.
Yeah, well, to that I say thank God, because you got to put links.
Oh, yeah. So our next card, we do have Liquimetal Torque. It's a 2-mana artifact. It taps for colorless mana, where you can tap it to make target non-land permanent an artifact in addition to its other types until the end of turn.
Yeah, so you have this marked because of Karn Great Creator, but because it cannot hit lands, I don't really see this thing doing it.
Yeah, I could see it being, because the Karn Great Creators, your sideboards, normally you have some like less than ideal ones. So the fact that you can pull this in against any deck that has other permanents that might have activate abilities or planeswalkers, so some of the more grindy matchups, the fact it's a mana rock on top of it is pretty nice. You're normally going to pull Liquid Metal Coating, so you can shut off one of their lands. But I do think the ability that you have to potentially bring in this thing as a mana rock that flexes into being better activations later, it could merit a one sideboard slot in a Great Creator leaning deck.
Yeah, and maybe, before there was some Karn Great Creator Shatter deck, and obviously this is the kind of card they would be looking for, so, I don't know, maybe it's another tool to make that deck slightly better, but, the Liquid Metal Coating, it just says Stone Ring. That's all it says, as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
So we will get to another equipment, and that's going to be Nettle Cyst, artifact equipment for 3, has Living Weapon, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and/or enchantment you control with the equip cost of 2. So we're seeing another, 3-drop artifact affinity payoff. Is this
Yeah,
is this one going to be too slow, or do you think this one can make the cut?
I think I like this more than the red-white one. So this is basically additional copies of cranial plating, but it builds you a body to go with it. You could do the enchantment side, so you might see it in other spots, but I think it's mostly going to be in an affinity list. So I think you're like playing 4 cranial platings and like 2 of this. So I think just on that alone, it's good. The fact it builds itself a body, and because of how large it can help make something, I do expect it to see some play. But again, we're pushing our win cons from 2 to 3 in the affinity deck after losing Opal. So I have to see the deck work before I'm like, yeah, affinity's back. You know what I mean?
Totally. The things I like about this is that it's +1/+1, so it buffs the butt. And I also like that the equip cost for a living weapon is totally reasonable too. So it's like, you play a huge threat, and if they kill it, it's ready to go on the next thing. And that's kind of what Affinity's game plan is. So I'm with you that it costs a little too much to be the focus of the deck and probably too much to be a 4 of, but I like all these pieces for Affinity coming in at a more reasonable, rate. And that, again, in a post-Opal Modern, like, it's going to have to do some beefier, and or longer lasting type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see.
Oh, yeah. So we have our next one, which is, there we go, Scion of Draco. So this is a 12 mana 4/4 flying dragon. Not a very good rate, but it does have domain. It costs 2 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. And each creature you control has vigilance if it's white, hexproof if it's blue, lifelink if it's black, first strike if it's red, and trample if it's green. So really, it's a 2 mana 4/4 flyer is what you're looking to make out of it with the domain zoo decks.
Yes, it's a 2 mana flyer, and you're going to be looking to, with a Triome plus the opposite Shockland, you can cast this on turn 2 with all 5 types. And so, that is extremely high on rate to be able to cast. People are jumping for joy when they can pull off the turn 2 Gurmag Angler. So, this speaks to being very powerful. And we look at the Kavu earlier, and we see 2 big threats that you're going to have available on turn 2.
Yeah.
And so,
even though it references Draco, it's also not a legendary. So that was the one thing when I first saw it, my mind immediately assumed it was going to be legendary. So the fact it's not makes it less liable to run 4 of trying to slam a 4/4 flyer onto.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see this as, this zoo deck is going to be able to play, a handful of, basically standalone threats that can really end the game on themselves, and then mix in cards that take care of the rest of their problems. So cards like Vindicate that I mentioned earlier, cards like Stubborn Denial when you have these huge threats. So I think it's going to be really interesting to find the right build. I do believe there is going to be a 5-color zoo deck that can be competitive.
Oh yeah, I think there will be for sure. It's like one of the early decks I want to test because I think it's got enough tools with tribal flames and things like that an opponent stumbles even a bit, you win. If the opponent loses the dice roll, you win. If the opponent has like any less than efficient way of interacting with you, you outrace them.
Right. And as we have a few more cards to wrap up here, we talked about the cookbook already. We'll just touch on it again just in case you forgot. 1 mana artifact taps to discard to create a food. 4 mana tap and sack it to return a creature from a graveyard to your hand. And as I go into the last card, we're wrapping up the set. And as you just spoke of the Scion, that deck is more of a generic style deck where you're just playing good cards. You obviously are themed on the domain, but you're less like an Infect or less like an Amulet Titan where these cards are only seen in this deck. So it's really going to be interesting to see how that plays forward, and we'll get a little bit more to the set wrap-up as we talk about our last artifact. We do have a few lands that are actually going to be lumped into one pile. So we do have a Void Mirror, which is not on our list, but it's basically a 2 mana artifact. Whenever a player casts a spell, if a colored mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. I mean, this has got to be the best hate card against Tron that's been printed, I would say. And yeah, I hate you. Watsi, please stop.
I mean, my only problem with Void Mirror is like we have Lavinia, which does a similar effect, and even decks that could play Lavinia just choose not to. So I think it's just so narrow. 15 sideboard cards for a lot of ways decks attack you in very unfair ways mean that you need to have some flexibility out of what you're doing. And also people have a really bad habit of thinking that they brought the right sideboard cards for certain decks, especially Tron, and no matter how many times they show up to the event, they're almost always wrong.
Yeah, but I do think this one is just stone cold, really. Like
Yeah, this one is really
Damping
good.
Sphere, the problem with cards like Damping Sphere and Blood Moon is Oblivion Stone. You slow down to play your thing. I have time to play my Oblivion Stone, play my fifth land, crack it, untap, dead. And this thing sidesteps that.
No, so this one actually is worse. It's really good against Eldrazi Tron, but it's actually really bad against regular Tron because you make random green mana all the time, and so you just spend a green to make your card. So you float 7 off of Tron. You pop a Chromatic Sphere, so you have 8 mana floating. Use the green and 6 of the Tron lands to play your Karn. You lose the floating colorless. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty hard to pull off. But you could be right because you still can make the big mana. So I guess all you need is a star in play or a basic. So I guess it's not there. But the problem is like if this gets in under that, it's going to be tough. But you could be right. It could just be unplayable.
Yeah, if they can resolve this before you play all your spheres and you don't have a forest, now it's countering all your spheres, and now you're in trouble.
Yeah. All right, wrap us up with this last artifact since I've been talking.
So this last one is Zavaz the Glimmer Wasp. It's a 1-mana modular 1 legendary artifact creature insect. If a modular triggered ability would put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters are put onto it instead, +1. So adds an extra counter for modular effects. You can pay a red to destroy target artifact you control. You can pay a white to give it flying. So basically, it's a 1/1 evasive artifact creature for your affinity deck that can force your modular activations a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they put a lot of modular in the set. We did not cover a lot of the commons and uncommons, just not really necessary. So, yeah, I mean, I think this will be a piece of the puzzle if Affinity's going to regain its footing because this into Ravager is just lights out.
Yeah. Because now Ravager gets 2 counters every time it sacks an artifact, and then you sack Ravager, put it on all the counters on this Glimmer Wasp, pay a white to give it flying, and get in there.
Yeah, so I love it. I love giving them another 1-drop that does cool, interesting things that can, move the counters around. I like that they're actually moving more back towards the keywords of modular and affinity.
Yeah,
so that's cool.
For sure.
So to wrap up the set, all we really have is it a handful? It's 5 or 6. There are these tap duels. They're at common. They enter tap. They're indestructible, and they're artifact lands. There's a blue-red, a red-green, a blue-white, a blue-black. I guess there's all 10, right? Yeah, there's all 10 of those.
All 10.
And then there's a power depot. Also enters tap, adds colorless. It has modular 1, and it has tap, add 1 mana of any color, spend this only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts, and it is the artifact land itself. That one interests me. If Affinity is going to be a little slower, that is quite a bit of value, but I don't see it. Because
I think if I'm playing any of these artifact lands, I'm playing the colored ones mostly to have extra Darksteel Citadels for Ensoul Artifact.
Right.
Less for Affinity decks. There's so many things already slowing Affinity. The loss of Opals slowed Affinity so hard that shoving some tapped lands in, I think, slow it to the point where now you're playing such a slower version of Burn. You might as well play Burn. Yeah,
totally. And we do have another land that's next up. Why don't you take us through it, because that one could be played.
So this is Urza's Saga. It is an enchantment land, Urza's Saga. It's a saga effect that has the first chapter. So whenever you play it, it gains tap to add a colorless mana. Then the second chapter gives it the ability to tap it, and create a 0/0 construct that gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, and it is itself an artifact. And then the level 3 is you can search your library for an artifact card, mana cost 0 or 1, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle, so you sack this thing. Interesting card, for sure.
I think, it does, for a land, it does quite a bit. And do take note that the third chapter says search your library for an artifact card with mana cost 0 or 1. So it does have to have the mana cost, meaning you cannot get a Lotus Bloom. So there's that. Kind of stinky, because that was obviously my first thought to go with it. But yeah, I could see this being an Affinity. I could see this being in any type of Wurza deck or Lantern deck. Because, tutoring up essentially a replacement is key. And I guess another thing is you cannot get Darksteel Citadel as well because then it would just be replacing itself, and at that point this card would be, probably
Exactly.
good.
That's my concern is the quality of our zeros and ones. Do I want to wasteland myself on turn 3 to go get, a brain jar or to go get a chalice on 0? I think the best play I can see out of it is if you are not running this as one of your lands. I think that's where people are going to make a mistake. This is a spell in your deck. This is not a land in your deck because you're going to lose it. So if you're treating it like a spell, and so you have your normal land drops, and then you know what your opponent's playing. So you see your opponent goes turn 1, Urza's mine. Then you can like slam this so as fast as possible you can go get a pithing needle or something. But
Yeah.
I am saying like I don't think this counts as a land in your deck because it can't replace itself with a land, and we don't have any 0 or 1 mana rocks in the format.
I don't think you count it as a whole spell. I think it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Because, modern decks, most of them don't need all their lands to activate, so to work, I should say. And so you lose this land, a decent portion of the time, you don't even care. And I do agree with your sentiment that it's going to be a lot better in non-affinity decks because their 1s and 0s are such higher leverage than they are in affinity. A Lantern deck cares way more about Lantern or about Pixis or whatever the pieces they need than Affinity cares about getting another modular guy or Zabaz we saw earlier or anything like that. So I do think that's the biggest gainer. Yeah, Urza, Imri. There's a lot of pieces where you can make an artifact deck where you're doing really cool, powerful things early in the game.
Yeah.
So,
and if you can't if your 0s and 1s aren't insane, then I feel like if they're just average, then you really want to make sure you're playing it at a point of the game where you can activate that chapter 2
twice,
at least twice, or to get something going. So I think there's a lot of people who are going to play this land and sequence poorly, and they're basically going to just like wasteland themselves for a pithing needle or something. And so like there's going to be a lot of very, very well thought out decisions you're going to have to make to play it.
Absolutely. And, a lot of forethought because this is a 3-turn, a process. And normally, you play a saga and you're hoping to get one now or, that. But this is, your land drop and that you will lose it. So it is a very high leverage card that you're going to have to get right all the time.
For sure.
Hey, but another interesting, back to Affinity is that this is another card that creates value and can let them go long. So maybe, their game is a slower creature deck where they play this and then they crank out the 2 tokens and that's what they're looking for. So
yeah. If you're in a position with Affinity where you're like, okay, I have some equipments, I'm going to represent lethal in 1 or 2 turns, then I can play Urza Saga to say, okay, once they answer my lethal, Urza Saga pops and goes and gets me a 1-drop, so I can resuit up and keep on representing lethal.
Yeah, and don't forget, you can activate this at the end of the turn. So you can pass, they wrath, okay, end of turn, make a token.
Yeah.
Untap, trigger, make another token, get a thing. I have, I'm going to be hitting for 5+ this turn or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool card, super cool card. I love sagas. And yeah, I hope I get to play with this and do cool stuff. I will not be getting an amulet or Aether Vial as many people initially looked at.
Yeah.
Too slow, right?
Way too slow.
Cool.
Way too slow. I can see you playing 1 to go get your amulet, but I don't see you getting an Aether Vial off.
Yeah, maybe it's like if it's a format where you also really like your.
Yeah.
Or maybe you need to make some idiots because you play it. You have a bunch of amulets, untap token. You never know. That deck can always make, Amulet can always make use of silly shit. So maybe this will.
With investment and Urza, it can make 3 ongoing mana because you just make 2 tokens and get a 1-drop. So then Urza's turned this 1 land into 3 different mana sources as long as Urza lives.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that Urza loves Urza Saga. And, it's fitting. It's cool to make a cool, powerful card that, is the name of, probably the most powerful block in Magic, one of the most iconic. So, tip the hat on that.
Oh, yeah.
And I get to wrap us up with our very last card of the set, a super cool card, Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, legendary land. Each land is a forest in addition to its other type. So we have a green Urborg.
Yeah. Pretty straightforward. It's not you forest walk things like you mentioned earlier. It's really good. Nissa lets you all your lands tapping for extra, really good. So I think it's because of what it is, I think, it's not insane. I think Saffron Olive pointed out earlier that this plus Nykthos plus Arbor Elf can represent a lot of mana. So, I mean, a lot of different things you can do with it that
Yeah,
are pretty
that's a great point. That will be, yeah, I mean, I could see those decks definitely going that direction. I see it as a really interesting card for Tron decks, especially Eldrazi Tron. I mean, you just put one of these in your deck, and now you can play whatever green card you need to. If you need to play whatever type of naturalizes, whatever you need to play, you have, if you're playing maps and all that, you have green in the can right here. And then Tron itself, unfortunately, it leans heavily on the forest be Blood Moons, but I mean, this card can still, really transform what you're able to do with Tron's mana base.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know that it will make a bunch of changes, but I love it. I love Urborg. I love giving it to green. I always hoped the blue one would come along, but that's obviously a horrendous idea.
They've actually outright said that this is the last of this cycle. They will not print a white, blue, or red one because there are specific hate cards in Modern for all three of those cards.
Yeah.
That would just annihilate
Boil you, choke you.
Yeah.
But also, you can do the mountain one because of Valakut, and that would just be don't do that.
Yeah, the Valakut was their reason.
Yeah,
there's Boil and Choke for the island. There's Valakut for the mountain, and then there's also a red spell that destroys all planes.
Flash Fire.
4 mana, Flash Fire. Yeah, and so because of that, they're like, these are the only two we can print into Modern without banning those cards.
Yeah, and they probably could do it the other way. That's fine, but yeah, maybe. I'm trying to think. I'm sure this is going to fit in all over the place. I'm sure.
People run a lot of it as a one-of if they have anything that cares about a force.
Exactly. Any Skoos deck is going to play this. Junda's probably going to like this maybe because, they have Skoos, but they also play a lot of Blightcleave Cliffs. But, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of speaks to the end of the set as we wrap up here in that there's a lot of powerful cards that can fit and interesting in different places.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of cards that currently exist, a lot of archetypes that currently exist that are getting some boosts. I think there are some archetypes that are going to struggle a little bit, but I don't see any cards that immediately make me be like, that's too strong, it's going to be broken. But I see a ton of cards in the set that are going to redefine archetypes, reawaken archetypes, or they're going to just make a whole new archetype.
Totally. Now, so to wrap up the set, we have a few categories we're going to run down through, just kind of like, pick of the set type of thing. And I'll kick us off with the biggest winner of Modern Horizons 2. We're looking back we're going to name one deck and one card that will gain the most from the printing of Modern Horizons. And I'll kick us off. I think the card that gains the most is Aether Vial. I think all this different tribal synergies, there's a bunch of really good creatures. And with Counterspell being printed, Aether Vial is a great place to be to get away from that.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
What's your pick?
I think my big pick for single card that gains the most, I want to say it's going to be a Hollow One. I think there's just so many different ways to enable that card, and it had fallen off really, really hard with the loss of Faithless Looting, and it's resurging again. So I think that card went from worth nothing to hopefully you still have your 4. I don't think it went up a lot of price or anything. So just got but yeah, I think that card got a lot of a boost.
Yeah, I love the pain that Hollow One caused me as a Hollow One player, so I cannot resist the degeneracy that is Hollow One. So yeah, it's one of those cards that is just waiting. It got overshadowed by Bridgevine a little bit. There was still both played, but then Hogak came out, and that was the obvious best thing to do. And then when they banned Faithless Looting, they hit every graveyard deck. And so yeah, now we see Asmo, we see this Madness, Rootwalla, we see the food, everything working together. So yeah, we're already seeing it, do dirty things. So that's a great pick. As far as decks that gain the most, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, it's really close. Between humans, merfolk, and goblins, I think they all got really important pieces. But I'm going to go with humans because I do think Recruiter is the biggest printing of all those things we went through.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think for me, I was real torn. I really wanted to go Merfolk because I think we got a couple really big Merfolk, but I think Domain Zoo. I think while Nakatl and the Zoo decks just haven't really had the pieces to justify going that far, taking that type of damage. Tribal Flames just wasn't enough on its own. But we literally had 2 domain cards printed plus the general. And so I think we have just a lot of pieces to make that deck very aggressive, and it can hit really hard. And the card quality is so high that your mulligans are decreased. That's the hard part in Modern is your linear decks you have to mulligan really aggressively for your combo pieces. Your aggro decks, the quality varies from one card to the next. So you're having to mulligan because your hands are too slow and weak. The Domain Zoo, I think, now has a structure where as long as your lands are right, your card power is so high that that deck will mulligan very rarely. And so I think it's going to be able to just play 2 threats, force you to answer them, play another threat, force you to answer them, and one threat can kill you in no time.
Right. I see. That style of deck kind of taking the place of a Jund and a Humans as well, because Humans has so many pieces they can mix and match for the meta, and then this Zoo deck, it's going to be able to take advantage of the fact all the opponents are mulliganing so low, and you're not going to have to mulligan very often. Your mana base is basically going to be, I don't know, 12 fetch lands, 2 triomes, and then 6, 7, 8 shocks, however many lands you need, and you're just going to be able to hit things all. And the card quality is going to be so good. You're going to be hard to sideboard against. You're going to have access to every sideboard card you want. So I'm really excited about that. That's the style of deck I enjoy playing, and we'll see if the Kavu and the Scion hold up the Hollow.
Oh yeah, I think it's gonna be some pretty aggressive stuff in the format, but I think it's gonna be extremely exciting.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned that you should definitely get your Ignoble Hierarchs now, and that leads me into what will be my favorite segment, Generate segment, where we ask the question: if you had to buy 100 copies of a card in this set to speculate on, what would you buy?
Oh, 100 copies.
100 copies of this Noble Hierarchy.
Not at all, because I think it's so high. Like, I think right now it's really high. I think it's going to be lower as the set comes out, but I still don't see it being good enough. And also, current Magic, like, you really want to be buying Mythics if you're looking to buy something that you're going to actually gain some money off of. Rares are so inconsistent. It might be Dracos. It might be Scion of Dracos. Like, if that Domain Zoo deck takes off, then like that or the Squirrel Lord, like something that might be a commander piece. But I'm looking for a mythic that's going to be a 4 of in a deck that is going to be a tournament player in a deck, and also still check some of the boxes for some of the more like commander and casual crowd. So I think something that iconic would be a card that I think the Scion of Dracos is one that I don't know what it goes for now, but if you can get it at a reasonable price, in a year, it's probably gonna be worth more. Because it's also a card. It's really hard for them to reprint. They have to reprint it into a generic set like this. They can't reprint it into any kind of constructed stuff.
Yes, I'm gonna check Star City Games, so you can get a normal Scion of Draco for $15.99.
Ooh, that's high though. But I mean, all of the set's high.
Yeah, the set is high. These Ragavans are $45.
Yeah,
I will say that I think that's too high.
Yeah, I think that's too high for what that card does. Let me take a look at the Modern Horizons real fast.
My thought was going to be Dauthi Voidwalker, because I feel quite certain that it's very, very good. And it's currently $19.99, and when I looked 2 days ago, it was $12.99. So that tells me people are already loading up on that. So that's what I would probably have my eye on. I believe it. I'm okay overshooting this one. I will not feel bad if this card ends up not working out, because to me it's just screaming at power.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get that one, around the $10 mark, then I think that's good indication of a good return. All the mythics the cheapest mythic is Titania at 12, and the rest of them are 15 and above. So I think, out of the mythics, Scion is, I think, the best low cost to high impact card. But I think the Voidwalker is probably the most powerful rare in the set, and in the top 5 most powerful cards in the set. So it's a good bet to take.
Gotcha. So did you have a pick for best card in the set?
I think pick for best card of the set has to be the Voidwalker because of how effective it is. The fact that it can just on its own, if you resolve it, it shuts off entire archetypes while attacking. So I think the value on it's just too high. I think it honestly might be the best card in the set.
That's where I would be probably. I think other mentions are Imperial Recruiter. It is a human, but it can do other stuff. There's always been a Kiki Jiki, Felidar, Resto Angel, a deck always close but trying to figure it out. And this card is amazing. So maybe even goblins can play a couple copies. So reliant on and other things like that. So.
Yeah, I think Grief is close and stuff, but I just think that Voidwalker, the fact that you can be a proactive deck while hosing an aspect of the game that's in Modern has been a prevalent piece of Modern since Eldrazi Winter, and it was a prevalent piece of Modern before Eldrazi Winter. Graveyard decks are just a thing. So the fact that you have this card that generates you a free, insane spell in some cases that threatens people really aggressively and that shuts down an entire aspect of Modern that has been abused for so long. That card is, when I look at rares, it's like that and Ignoble Hierarch are the two rares I'm like $50 to $80 rares in a year, because unless they get reprinted really soon, they're going to be staples in the format.
Yeah, totally. And I think, it will be interesting to see, you mentioned print demand, how much that's going to get printed. Are people going to be drafting? I'm certainly going to be trying to draft Modern Horizons 2 as much as I can, because it looks like, guys, we skipped a lot of commons and uncommons, but if you go back and look through, it looks like it's going to be a really fun set to draft as things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's important to remember they say print to demand, but they're also restricting how many draft booster boxes you can get. So a lot of vendors are only getting a third or a fourth of their request for draft booster boxes, and instead they're being sent set booster boxes. And set booster boxes, you can get multiple rares in a pack, but they have less packs per box, and the price of the set is really high. So and then you have a month later, you have Forgotten Realms, which is going to be a massive set that a lot of people are going to go buy. So there's not a big window for that demand to be met before people move on to the next product. So it's print to demand, but it's very expensive price tag, so people can only buy so much of it and crack so much of it. So I'm of the mindset that this set's going to be not dropping in price like people are hoping and expecting it will because of the print to demand label.
Gotcha. Yeah, I might have to try to scroll me a few cases.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're good to buy and hold for sure.
Yeah. All right.
You got fetch lands in them.
You got anything else to say about Modern Horizons?
I think my only other big takeaway is I referenced it a little bit earlier, but I think the biggest deck people are down on because of the set is Tron. And I'm of the opinion that there's been so much hate thrown at Tron over the last few years that I have to see Tron fall before I believe a couple cards kills it. So I'm very much of the mindset that a lot of these cards are so restrictive and so narrow that if Tron's not the top deck, there won't be enough of them in sideboards to keep it from being a successful tournament deck. So I think Tron's going to go from every tournament deck to you have to rotate it in and then rotate it out and rotate it in and rotate it out. And as long as Tron's not the top 3 deck in the format, then you'll go into tournaments and just clean house with it because people will have to board for other stuff.
Yeah, I definitely see Tron going more towards that dredge direction where you have the sideboard hate sometimes and you don't. That's what you're trying to aim at with Tron. But I also do agree, the more I thought about it, I saw the tape pieces and I thought, well, if more decks are going these creature mid-range decks, Tron loves that. So I do agree. I'm going to have to see Tron fall first, but I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be taking it to, the first tournaments right away. Hollow One stuff, They're doing whatever other crazy stuff they do. It will have to find a way, but the deck's so powerful and it takes the best advantage of the mulligan role that we currently have than any other deck in Magic, I think. Maybe advantage Dredge. That. As long as we're, whatever what is the mulligan now?
London mulligan.
The London mulligan. Excuse me. If the London mulligan persists forever, I mean, Tron's going to have a home.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. All right, so that'll be it. I had a lot of fun shooting this podcast, and that's it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Peace out.